Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the What's in My Head podcast, and I want to welcome David to our special Halloween episode. David, the head writer for Courage the Cowardly Dog. David, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I can't think of a better way to spend Halloween.
Yeah, they don't know it's not Halloween just yet. But ladies and gentlemen, we're shooting this a little bit ahead of time, but this is our Halloween episode, and I couldn't think of what better possible way than to talk about a dog that was afraid of everything. And I mean, you gave us, everything we loved about this dog. I mean, you were there from the beginning. You were writing all of this stuff. Let's take a step back. And do you remember when you got the call or how you really got on board and working for Courage?
Well, just to be clear, I wasn't there from the beginning,
Yeah.
from the A beginning, maybe from the beginning.
Yeah.
If there was a C beginning, no, I was definitely between the A and the C. So, because John Dilworth himself did the Chicken from Outer Space short film that was nominated for an Oscar, and that proved to be the pilot for the series. And they had, I think, written one or two episodes when Cartoon Network said, we want a head writer, we want someone who's done this before, we want experience. And I've had the experience of walking into someone else's home, so to speak, to help them raise their child. Several shows that I've worked on, it's like, you're the TV, you've done TV before, so you go in and help these artists, and you're like the guy that they hate because the network said you need him to tell stories. It was like that on Strangers with Candy when I worked on that. But with John, it was really much simpler, and I think we pretty much hit it off. Somebody who was working on the show is the sister of a very good friend of mine with whom I worked when I was executive producer of the Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss shortly before Courage, and he recommended me to his sister, which was very high praise. My friend Alan Neuwirth and Risa Neuwirth, his sister, and I remember the meeting. I remember going in for the first time, and John is a striking fellow. He's an artist. He's unusual, and I'm an artist too, and I guess I'm unusual. But it wasn't the typical show business interview. It was very much about the vibe, and the show. John so brilliantly conceived the show. It was simple in the best possible way, but so elegant. It was the perfect setup of characters. You had this scared little pink dog who had to live up to his name, Courage, because his mother figure, dear sweet Muriel, Thea White, may she rest in peace, was oblivious to all things evil. She was blind to bad.
Yeah.
That's why she married that bastard, the farmer. And she didn't even, she would run off with a goose god. She would go off to Valhalla. She just thought everything was fun.
Yeah.
And it was a great little dynamic, and that these were to be, sort of delving into science fiction and horror tropes and emulating those movies and celebrating the genres only made it even more delicious to me. So I felt the show right away.
Yeah.
And I can't say that about everything that I've walked into or even created on my own. You don't necessarily have the clear, but it was such a clear vision and such a beautifully designed, exquisite work of art. I mean, John's color palette. I dream in those colors now, I think. And it really, I just sort of dove right in, and I try to tune into the frequency that's there. I mean, this is what I've always tried to do as a head writer or as a writer for hire on another price. It's like, what is this show supposed to be? Not necessarily what I think it is, not necessarily what that person thinks, or what the network thinks it is, or the studio. what is this show? And particularly if the creator is there running the thing, as John was, that's great. So I could tune into his frequency. He's in the room, or down the hall. So it was really a pleasure because, right, and then cut to 4 seasons later, and it's like, okay, I don't know if there's another story in my head, uh, but that's an enviable position to be in. It's the longest I ever spent on one series, is 4 seasons.
Yeah.
And that was courage. I mean, I've worked in a lot of different environments, on a lot of different kinds of programs, live and animated. And, I had done a couple of seasons on some shows, but this was like, 4 seasons in however, 2.5 years. I don't remember exactly, but, it's like a fever dream, in my memory, or like a long fever dream, very psychedelic and weird. And it changed, as any good experiences, if you even a bad experience,
Yeah.
In the arts, in entertainment, it should add some colors to your palette.
Mm-hmm.
It should change the way you think a little bit, whether you embrace that for everything or not. I mean, there are things for which the courage palette might not be appropriate, but it has really infected so much of what I do. Yeah. And I started off being a fan of all these genres, and then certainly an animation fan. So I was kind of primed for the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just like you dive in and you got to start swimming, So that's really how it started. And Risa and Alan, the New Earth siblings, if you're watching and listening, love you both for getting me involved in that madness.
So,
and Risa for keeping me sane while I was doing it.
So taking a step back for just a second, man. So you get in here. What was the first interaction with John like? I mean, what did you guys hit it off right off the bat, or what was some of the things that you guys would connect on? Because obviously, whenever you meet somebody, I don't know about you, but myself, I cook for a living, so I always go either straight to food or straight to television or straight to movies, because I feel like that's a gap that most people can kind of like just tinker down just a little bit, because you're like, oh, if you like that, you probably like this, and we can talk about this, that, and the other. So what was some of the things that you and John might have hit it off right out of the bat with?
Well, it's hard to remember exactly like what we hit it off on right away. It was an interesting dance, and John is, I felt it was on me to really understand him.
Yeah.
So I was focusing on that. I'll tell you that some of the things along the way, I think more and more I found the common ground and the things that we both kind of loved as we proceeded in the first meeting and the first few days of working on the program. I mean, it's a blur. When somebody created a project and now they have a chance, and it was successful, it was nominated for an Oscar, now he has a series, and here comes this guy who's going to run the writing on the show. I'd be skeptical. I'd have a lot of questions. I'd be watching this guy, or a woman, or however they identify. I was watching them and thinking, is this the right mix? And I'm sure that there was some of that with John, and and for me too. And it was, I felt a real kinship to the project. So it wasn't like other projects where it's like, I'm having a hard time wrestling my way in, to this concept or to understanding what the creator wanted, and also winning the trust. But I think that, we were moving pretty quickly from the start. The exigencies of television production, especially in animation, you're on a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
And then like was it the second season? I don't remember. The third season, we doubled the production schedule to get it done. It was like suddenly we're doing twice as much work in the same amount of time. And that's a recipe for no sleep. And a lot of tension within, if not, surrounding you. And you don't really have time to stop and think. You just, despite the fact that it's a conveyor belt and I have to deliver, I treasured each episode, like this precious little gem, that I was polishing or crafting, helping to craft. And I didn't really. It's funny because I haven't thought about it, but I hadn't thought about it. I didn't stop to reflect a lot. The harder you're working, and this from anything you do, the harder you're working, the less time you have to think about, is this really working, or how it's, I have to make this work.
Yes.
And I have to honor John Dilworth's creation, John's concept, his ongoing input. Most of the story ideas came from him in, small paragraphs, and then we would sit around and beat it out around a table. We could talk more about that later if we talk about the process of the show, but it's you find the rhythm, and then you find a way to work within the schedule, within the budget, but most important, within the structure that the creator of the show, John in this case, whether the creator of the show knows it or not, like you try to find, as I said before, that frequency to tune into. You say, okay, this is, and sometimes you say to people, and I'm not sure if I ever said it to John, but sometimes it's like, I think what you really want to do is this thing. You see somebody struggling to get at a point, especially someone who's not natively a writer, full time. John is a fine storyteller and a good writer, but I was there to make sure that he had scripts he could work with, and I would just hand them off. It's one thing that was different, and we took again something maybe for further along, but one thing that's different in this kind of animation is that the head writer is at the beginning of the conveyor belt and stays there. Children's animation is mostly like this. Whereas The Simpsons, Futurama, prime time, they're more like sitcoms in terms of the writers being the executive producers, and I've been in that position before, and running the whole damn thing, and being involved, all the way down, not every single writer, but the writers who rise to producer, you follow the project down the conveyor belt to the end. And I think that serves the writers better. Especially when you have a revolving door of freelancers coming in to do individual scripts. We had a couple of people who were regularly at the table, people who John liked, and these are other colors on my palette. I'll get to know them and use them the best I can. But just the very nature of it is hyper focus on the scripts, and then a year later or however many months later, you see a cartoon, and it's amazing. It's like, sometimes it's, yes, that's the script. That's what wow. Sometimes it exceeds what you had in mind, and sometimes it's different. I dare say sometimes it's disappointing. That wasn't really the case with Courage. I can't remember ever really being disappointed in how something turned out. But there is a certain amount of frustration in being locked in at the beginning, and sort of interesting, during the whole first season, I hadn't yet met Jody Gray, who was the music director for the show, and with Andy Ezrin composed the score and the theme song. And I forget if there were any songs I wrote in the first season, but certainly some of the stuff I did was set, Jody was really helping the show. he is one. He's a great storyteller in music,
Yeah.
and we were collaborating for a year without ever having met, and then maybe at the first season wrap party, I don't know, I don't remember exactly when I met him, but it was a year down the line, and we became like best friends.
Mhm.
And we've been writing songs together ever since. Jody will always bring me into any project he can, and I would bring him in, and then we just sit around. And we were just sitting around the other day on my roof playing ukulele together and singing Beatles songs, just chilling and looking at the Manhattan skyline, because that's what you see from my roof. So it was kind of cool. We weren't even trying to write anything, which was unusual. We were just relaxing, because usually when we're together, we're like tuning to each other's frequencies, and I'm writing lyrics and music. He's writing music and lyrics. He's like, we're overlapping a lot, because I write music and he writes lyrics, and we write songs on our own.
Mm-hmm.
When we're together, I have this romantic feeling about songwriting teams.
Yeah.
Starting with, well, from my young awareness, the Beatles, Lennon and McCartney, but certainly going back to Rodgers and Hart and the classic, the standards. It was interesting. It was really interesting to feel that I had this like kinship with somebody I hadn't met, because I heard the music.
Mm-hmm.
I knew John. I was already working with John. I was already working with, the other writers. And music is always such an important thing to me, especially in a cartoon. And it was really a treat. I treasure that when years later you're still working with the same people. Alan Newirth, who I mentioned before, still working with them. Not right this minute. Jody and Alan just created a project together, and if it goes forward, I'll be writing episodes for them. Cool. If the project that Jody and I are working on together goes forward, Alan Newirth will be writing episodes for us. Either way, it's fun. Yeah. I mean, things have to happen, and you have to get things done. But there's something really magical in, sort of, it reminds you of finding your friends in high school, and for me, that was the most formative time of my career, my young, like in high school, I figured out what I wanted to be and who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And I want everything I do to wind up feeling like I did after a school show, after we would, put on a musical, mm-hmm. And then we would all go out, and oh man, that feeling of kinship and brother and sisterhood, and just loving all these people, and you're like 16, 17, 18, it's or a little younger. What's better than that? And that's just what I want, what I've always wanted and want moving forward. I just want to be celebrate, and it's fun because it's particularly cool that when the kids from high school, who are no longer kids, as I've learned, I thought I was until I saw them, finding me through social media, and I'm still in touch with a lot of it. I went to a huge high school in Brooklyn, very much like a performing arts school, at least the corner of it that I occupied, and we're still very friendly, a whole bunch of us, and and it's just it's wonderful when they come back to me as fans of something I've done, and but they remember the stuff I did for the school show.
Yeah.
And they'll sing a song that I wrote back then. I wrote my first songs in high school, and sometimes I'll get a voicemail of somebody calling me up and singing me something I wrote when I was 17, and that is so touching. There's to me, there's very little emotional difference between that experience and winning an Emmy, emotionally.
Yeah.
In terms of career, the Emmy means much more, because I love my high school friends, and maybe I got some kind of award for for English or writing or whatever, but I don't put that on my resume. So
it's I wanted to highlight something you just said, because going through life, and like I said, I'm 32. I've been all over this world. I've been all over this country. I've seen some good shit. I've seen some bad shit. What
You
I'm
bet.
getting at is I've got perspective on life, and I've been doing this, and not this specifically podcasting, and just seeing the world and everything since I was about 17 years old, right? So when you get out of your comfort zone, and you experience shit, whether it's adversity or you're just going through life, just looking at things differently than how you used to look at them, right? Perspective really is what I'm getting at. And you hit those hard days like we all have. Like I said, you reminiscing about high school and your friends and the musicals and all this other stuff. It really brought a smile to my face because everybody can relate to that. Then when we get into this mundane, I guess this consistent repetitiveness of adult life, right? We get to the throes of work. You get up the same time every day. You leave your house if you work outside of your house. You leave your house at the same time. You go and essentially do the same thing you do on a consistent basis every single day, 40 plus hours a week, and then you sit back and you realize, like, holy shit, man, it's fucking Saturday. I was like, I'm still sitting in Tuesday 2 weeks ago. What the hell is going on, right? And then we get lost in not so much the moment, but we get lost in what you were saying is always on the run, always on the go. It's go, 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 go. We don't have time to sit back and really reflect on where we're at that specific point in time.
Right.
And then you sit there and you think about, oh shit, some of the funnest times I ever had was just hanging out with my friends, writing songs, sitting up on my roof, looking at a beautiful city skyline, right? Just making music, right? So we have this, like you said, a very romantic way of looking and reminiscing and everything like that. But the only reason I brought up all of that word vomit that I just threw out of my mouth is a very important reason. Is if you're ever having one of those days where you're just like, fuck, dude, why am I doing this? Or why am I not doing this, right?
Why am I not doing this is really the question I ask myself more often.
Yeah, why am I not doing this? If you can remember that feeling that David was just talking about, just that joy of doing something that you love. And then if you're doing something you love, but you feel like it's that mundane task, you feel like it's just another Tuesday when it should have been a Saturday, right? Remember why you loved whatever it is you love, whether it's writing music, whether it's drawing, whether it's fucking making a computer game or making the next animated show. If you can remember why this elicited some kind of emotion or some kind of feeling in you at that one point in time, it doesn't really feel like work at the end of the day. And that's what I get from just listening to you talk just for like the last 15, 20 minutes, however long it's been since we've been talking, man. You have this joy of what you're doing. And not very many people, one, get to experience that, but they get to live that joy. Some people just do shit because it's a job. They sign a little paycheck at the end of the week. It goes into their bank account and they get to do whatever it is they want to do on their free time, right? So that's what a lot of people look at jobs at. But you can tell when you look at your writing, your music, and everything else you've done, you enjoy what you do. And we as fans can feel that. And we as fans appreciate that type of shit, because a lot of people just phone shit in, David, is what I'm getting at. And go ahead, Sue.
No, well, thank you. I mean, you kind of gave me the chills talking about them. First of all, I know how fortunate I am to be basically doing what I promised myself I wanted to do in high school. And I didn't know I wanted to be a writer per se. I didn't want to write sitcoms. That wasn't my aspiration. There were plenty of sitcoms I loved. I grew up, watching sitcoms in the 70s. So Mary Tyler Moore and All in the Family, great transformational sitcoms. And I wound up doing that. But it's hard for me to imagine, doing a job because that's what you went to school for. And, I was a psychology major in college. I did that because I knew I wanted to go into the arts, but maybe I would go to graduate school. And psychology always attracted me, and it helps me be a better writer. I think if I went back to school now, I'd go back and become a music therapist. It really calls to me. It really does. And in fact, some of the songs I've written, I'll just do a little tangent right here. Some of the songs I've written, particularly with Jody Gray, songs for like the Clifford the Big Red Dog movie or something. We would get emails from fans who were using certain songs of ours on therapy, music therapy for someone's, like the patriarch of the grandpa of a family who had been in a car accident and had brain injuries, and he heard his granddaughter watching the Clifford movie in the next room, and he heard this uplifting song that we wrote that ran under the end credits, and it's a nice pop song. You wouldn't know it was a kid's song.
Yeah.
And it was this woman saying, I don't know where to get it. And unfortunately, it was not available for sale anywhere, which is a damn shame. But she wanted to put it on her father's tape to at that time, I guess it was a tape, because it cheered him up. And then that same song, several parents of autistic children said the kids were responding to the song. And it was a yin and yang song. It was I can't come home until I go.
Yeah.
And it was just a lot of, the sun only rises from a dark, dark sky. Answers only come to satisfy why. This goodbye comes back hello. I can't come home until I go.
Yeah.
And Jody wrote the most exquisite melody and produced it like the shiniest late 60s, early 70s pop tune, Beatles, Nilsson, early Elton John. I mean, it was just a gorgeous record. So you don't know, when you're doing this work, you don't know who you're reaching and how you're reaching them. And in retrospect, that gives even more significance to the experience that you had. So much you don't think about, I don't think about, is this show a hit? Yes, at the end of the season, I want to know if there's going to be another season, and I'm rooting for it. But it's like I'm doing the best I can. And it's hard. I mean, to say that it is, I do something I love, but there's a risk to that. Getting back to your original point, there's a risk to doing something you love as much as I love writing and the arts and performing and, anything that involves entertaining other people or creating art. I really don't draw the distinction for me. And it's hard work, and it's painful as it's joyful. But it's also, then you hit it, it's like trying to craft a story. That's the hardest part. And my ethic is to get the story, especially for an 11-minute cartoon, own that story beat for beat, scene for scene, before you type fade in on the script. I would drive certain writers crazy by making them outline things to death. Well, I would outline things to life is really the point. And because of the way we worked, when we would have our story meeting on a Monday, whatever, with a writer, and a couple of hours, and we would break down everything, and there shouldn't be any weird surprises when they hand in an outline. It should be faithful to what we discussed in the room, because we don't have time to veer off track. And most of the writers, adapted to that, and but it's intense. It really is intense work. The famous quote, and I don't remember who said it, but I'm a writer. I don't like writing, though. I like having written.
Yeah.
And, so much of what you put up with is, you get notes, like you go through it and you work so hard. And then somebody says, somebody who's signing your check gives you notes, and you're like, sometimes they're good notes and sometimes they're not. But when I finish something, I've heard first drafts referred to as vomit drafts. And this was when I was in sitcoms. Just get it on the paper, we'll fix it around the table. And a lot of shows work that way and work well that way. Roger and I, when we were together, we got two wonderful compliments to the same point. The second of which, when we were on Parker Lewis, Clyde Phillips, the creator and executive producer of the show, said, "You guys write second drafts first."
Nice.
And that was like the best thing you could say to a writer. And part of that was because we were a team and we were great at editing each other and we complemented each other. And we're both doing the same thing on our own now. I just worked with him on a series. He was the head writer and he pulled me in. That was great. But having a really great partner just helps you vault over so many creative obstacles.
Yeah.
And it's not something you can force. It's like you wind up in a room with a lot of people and you have to sort of learn how to negotiate the collaboration. And sometimes I'm the one doing all the collaborating.
Yeah.
But it's still collaboration. It depends on who I'm working with. But when it's a love affair, as it was with Roger and me, I mean, we were buddies in college, and we made each other laugh. And he went to journalism school, and he was an editor at Business Week magazine when we got our first big break and moved to California to work in show business. Because we were doing stuff together just because it was fun, because we loved each other and we just loved, and we would write anything that we had the opportunity to write, silly things, not so silly things, anything that came along. And then when, we had the opportunity for a big break, we were ready. Mm-hmm. That's one of the secrets to success, is being ready.
Yeah.
And having that script ready when somebody says, "Let me see a sample of your writing," and you say, "Okay, here it is." You don't go home and write it then, Yeah. But it's certainly joyful, when you take a step back from it, when you're sitting at a table and you're pounding your head against the, the computer screen and you're trying to make notes work, or you're dealing with somebody who's not quite getting, or even if everything is going as smooth as can be, you're still crafting a story. And it's you're gestating a child, I mean, in a way, and that's hard work, much harder in the literal actual sense of gestating a child, but in a different way. This is the brain power that goes into it. And it's a lot of sitting around the table just staring into space, silence, and then you hear somebody say, "Hey, what no, never mind." Once, and it's a very interesting process. But yes, I am really grateful that what I love to do has been well received, and I get paid for it.
Yeah.
And I run the risk of hating what I love from time to time, as much as it's true what you said. If I had a job working in a bank, with all due respect to people who work in banks, I mean, sometimes I envy people who have day jobs and come home and they have a rock band, and they play gigs around the city, and they have albums that they release, and I know them from Facebook, and then I go see them perform, and they're great, but they have day jobs, a lot of them, and this is what they do at night. One of the guys who has a rock band, his day job was writing for Letterman, so he kind of had like both ends of the world. And there was nothing I wanted more than to write for Letterman, and I went so far as to have a meeting with him in his earliest days, in his late night show, and he asked me when I could start, and I said, this was a Thursday. I said Monday, because it's Friday tomorrow. That would be crazy to start on a Friday, right? He hadn't hired me. I thought he did. I went home and I was hired to work on Late Night with David Letterman. It was the show after Carson, and no, he didn't hire me. And then he didn't hire me again, and then he didn't hire me a third time. So But I have lots of good friends who work on the show. Anyway, that was an interesting tangent, at least from me. Feel free to cut it out.
No, man. If I don't have to edit anything out, like I said, I've had this talk, or I've mentioned this a few times. So for the fans, I apologize. I enjoy conversations, right? I feel like they are completely lost. And that's why I always tell people I don't have a script on anything, with the exception of the fans' questions that I have written down here. I don't really know what we're going to talk about. Like, I know some possible things we might talk about. Like, obviously, I know you from Courage, but before we started talking, when we were talking on the phone and shit, I didn't know you did music, right? So I know, like, I see these names, like, oh shit, he wrote all of this shit for Courage. That's what I knew him for. And then when you start peeling back the layers of people, and he's like, oh, he's into music. Oh, he's a writer. Oh, he does all of this crazy shit. And then that story will lead into one thing, and that thing will lead into something else. And like I said, I just love where it goes. We'll eventually get to whatever it is we're supposed to talk about. But this is the great thing about podcasts, man. You could do a part 1, a part 2, a part 3, a part 4, anything we possibly miss. Because if the fans are good about anything, it's letting you know when you fucked up, and he's like, oh, you guys didn't talk about this enough. So can you guys go back and talk about this? And then, the next time they come on, we might hit on something else. Right. But like I said, I like seeing how people got to where they're at now, because it's a fascinating topic, because your experience of life and my experience of life and anybody else that's listening, their experience of life is going to be completely different. Right. Obviously, I didn't write for Letterman either. You didn't write for Letterman.
We're the same that way.
Yeah, right. So we're simpatico, essentially, is what I'm getting at, right? So,
well, you never interviewed with him, so you weren't turned down for a job. You might very well have gotten the job I wanted if you had been alive at that. You were probably in second grade at the time.
So. That would have been the biggest shit show if I've tried. So I wrote one article not too long ago. And I use article very, very loosely, because I was not a very good student at all. In elementary school, middle school, high school, I didn't give a shit. Like, I loved my Italian class. My Italian teacher, Mrs. Ray, phenomenal teacher, one of my favorite teachers. My culinary teacher in high school, Mrs. Burgett. I would skip into their classes just so I could do work for those teachers, right? So the culinary, because I've wanted to be a chef since I was 12. Before that, I wanted to be an animator. It wasn't until I went to Universal Studios Orlando when Nickelodeon was still here, and they were rolling out a little show called Spongebob Squarepants. And this is before they, rotated everything over to Burbank. At least I think it's Burbank. But whenever they went out to the West Coast, and I just see an animator down there, he's drawn, and then he keeps ripping shit down, balling it up, throwing it over his shoulder. I'm like, I just figured out that I will never be able to do that, because I thought what I was drawing was really cool and really good. That guy just threw away everything because it wasn't a spec, it wasn't a model. They had to keep restarting. I was like, I just can't do this. And then it wasn't until Emerald Live, I was flipping through channels one day, and I see Emerald, and he just had the entire, the crowd captivated. It was like a magician, right? He had everybody's undivided attention, and all he was doing was cooking and talking. I was like, that seems easy as shit. And then you try, you're like, holy shit, talking and then trying to do stuff when you don't know what you're doing is very, very difficult, right? So you just try to find your way in life and everything like that. But the podcasting, and it's funny you said your friend, he's got a day job and then he gets to come home and he's in a rock band, right? So this is what I do. Like, I got my day job in the kitchen, and this is what I do for fun, because I love talking to you guys, man. You guys and gals have been so fun and so open with your time. And then you don't get to hear this shit if I just asked you, so what was it like working on Courage? What was it like working with John? What did you do in episode X, Y, and Z, right? Because we don't hear about all of the shit that made David, right? So
no, it's apparent, and having watched several of your episodes, you're enjoying a conversation, and you bring things out of people. You humanize the name on the screen, and it's not just like a collection of anecdotes about the show. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a million anecdotes about a million experiences I've had throughout my career.
Yeah,
I really should write the book that I, it's like, which is would really just be a series of short vignettes of things that happened to me. But
what would you name it?
What would I name the things that happened to me? I don't know. I actually did have a title at some point, but I would bet that the title would emerge from one of the stories. One of the anecdotes would suggest a title for the entire book, which would be, the sheer joy I experienced working and continue to experience working in entertainment, brilliant people I worked with, people whose names you might know because you read credits,
Yeah.
And people who everybody knows because they're famous. The first person to hire Roger and me was Steve Martin. So where do you go from there? That's what you're aiming for. That's you're climbing a ladder to get to Steve Martin, and we just start that on that level, and we were ready. I mean, that's Steve, and I can call him Steve, although he wouldn't recognize me if he saw me because it's been a couple of decades. Has said, when asked, what do you do to get into the business? How do you, and his answer is, be so good
they can't deny you.
They can't ignore you. Yeah. And exactly. And, I guess we were because Steve couldn't ignore us. And that's really, to stand out in a field of, look, honestly, there are a lot of mediocre writers. There are a lot of hacks. There are a lot of people who are really quite good at just, sailing along, from job to job. And it's a workman's life, and they're very, very good. And some of them are just more like technicians than artists.
Yeah.
And it works. I don't think of myself that way. But it's interesting. I mean, there's always a trade-off, and just to cap off the conversation about your day job versus your night job. My day job is writing scripts for television. My night job is writing songs.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I'm doing it in service of the shows I've worked on. I did a series of Dr. Seuss musicals for Nickelodeon in the late 90s. So wrote a lot of songs for that. But I didn't. Basically, I might end up hating writing scripts, at least for a period of time, but I don't want to ever hate writing songs or writing music. So that's I'll just take the time, and I don't write. Well, it's kind of a renaissance for me since during the pandemic and quarantine. I wasn't going anywhere, so I was playing a lot of piano and guitar and ukulele and writing a bunch of songs that were actually performed live in my neighborhood by a singer who was an opera singer who was entertaining the neighborhood every day at 6 o'clock, and at 7 o'clock we would applaud the workers during the pandemic. Now he does it once a week. Still doing it, but he's a school teacher and an opera singer. And that was glorious because, I wrote a couple of songs that he performed on the street where I live, down the block, with, a nice little audience of neighbors. And it was extraordinary. I felt like, I'm living in a little village during the Renaissance, and this is the little theater. But that's my night job. That's I love writing scripts. I have a deep passion for writing music. And because music, even though it incorporates words, if it's a song, there's something about music that you can't put into words. And it just, brings, if I don't play an instrument, I will dry up. I remember when I moved to Los Angeles to work with Steve Martin, at some point soon thereafter, I desperately needed a therapist, because I was enjoying myself. I get very anxious when I'm happy. When I'm feeling like, I would have anxiety attacks when like good things would happen, and say, wow, we're going to do Alf Tales. We're going to do an animated version of Alf. We're working on Alf Primetime, but we're going to do that and this, and and then I started freaking out. So anyway, I had a therapist, and she said, well, what eases your anxiety? And I said, playing the piano, playing an instrument will immediately stop an anxiety attack from me.
Yeah.
He said, do you have a piano? And I said, no, I don't have one here on the West Coast, because I was still like living in New York, but spending most of my time in LA working. So I was really living in LA. And she said, I would write you a prescription for a piano. I don't think your plan covers it, but for God's sake, go buy yourself a piano.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a nice digital keyboard, a Korg piano at the time, so I could play late at night with headphones and not wake my wife, because that's when I'd be freaking out. And it was the best piece of advice anybody gave me. So if I don't play an instrument, for a while, I feel something dying inside me. It feels like I'm drying out, and it's just, it's what I grew up. I'm looking up at the wall. But it's pictures of my brother and my two sons playing instruments together over there, and I have the greatest memories of growing up in a house filled with music. And that's another thing. My parents gave my brother and me every opportunity to express ourselves artistically and to become, any instrument we wanted, we would have. Any musical, and we were poor. I mean, not poor. We were middle class. But my mother was a school teacher, and my father was out of work for a while. So we were. It wasn't like we had a load of money, but when if I wanted art supplies, paints, I used to paint a lot when I was a kid, or when I was younger. They'd materialize. My brother wanted to play French horn in the school orchestra. He had a French horn. And everyone in my family plays an instrument. Everyone paints. It's just, I meet people who I've never met in my family, and I say, "Oh, that's beautiful. What's that painting?" "Oh, I painted that."
Yeah.
So I grew up in a home that was filled with music,
mm-hmm.
And when you, and that was what saved me from what wasn't the best. It wasn't the best situation when I was growing up in terms of my parents. They split up and got back together and split up and got back together and split up. It was like, it was bad. It was not, there was no way to stabilize it, but I found a lot of refuge in the music. So, I would play a lot of music, and then I'd stay home sick from school a lot, and then extend the illness so I could study television.
Mm-hmm.
And create stories. In fact, the first script I ever wrote was a dream I had. First script for a sitcom. I had a dream about the Dick Van Dyke Show, and I dreamt the beginning of an episode, and I was like 8.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, I'll just say very quickly. I'm sorry because I'm really going on, because you do tap in. I want to tell you everything. You're better than my therapist. But
well, my hourly rate is astronomical, David. You can't.
Well, you deserve more than you're getting. I can tell you that. But the dream was simply this: it was daylight savings time. Anyway, they were setting the clocks back an hour, and each member of the family, like Laura did it, then little Richie did it, and then Rob did it, and Rob shows up for work. I forget which way they had to push the clock. I'm not doing the math in my head right now. It doesn't matter. Rob shows up for work, and it's dark out, and nobody is there. And he's wondering what the fuck is going on. And that was all. It was like, the beginning of an episode. And it was similar to a couple of episodes I'd seen where Rob would show up to work and wonder why things weren't the way they were supposed to be. And I was 8, and I was like, I just thought, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I reflect back on it and go, yeah, I could see somebody pitching that.
Yeah.
And I've probably seen it, it's just some clock. It wouldn't be the whole episode. It would just be like a beat, that that's why I was late, because my wife set the clock, and I set the clock, and then my son. But now it wouldn't play because the clocks set themselves. So
Yeah, I've tried using that excuse. Like, oh man, it didn't reset. The only time I've actually gotten to use it in modern times is when I was deployed and your phone's not hooked up to Wi-Fi, it's not hooked up to any kind of cell service. So that's how you would get up. We would work 12 on, 12 off. And then the only, and I pride myself on never being late, but the one time I was late, because I always show up to some place 30 minutes early because I have this irrational fear of being late. Like I don't want to, and I don't want to sit there and be, the reason that this is behind is because of me. I didn't show up on time. So I've always just been go, 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 go. And the one time I could actually use it, I was in the military and they just didn't give a shit whether it was daylight savings time or not. Like you were supposed to be here. I'm like, God damn it. If I was in a civilian, this would work. Right. So, but there's one thing you said that I really loved. It was your doctor said, hey, I'm going to write you a prescription for a piano. You got to go and get this, right? Because I feel 100% of everything you just said, because I'm the same way when it comes to cooking, right? So I will wake up, I don't sleep very well. I maybe get 2 or 3 hours of consecutive sleep, and then I'm up for a couple hours and I'm staring at the ceiling like, why am I up? And then it's just like I get very restless, and I don't want to wake my wife up. And then we got the baby in the room too, so I don't want to wake him up because it's just an even longer day, right? So I usually get up and I'll come around. I go and get my dog. I have a red and white female husky. Her name is Ollie, and she's pretty much the person. Because if you look at her and you see her and you hang out with her, you're like, man, you're more than a dog. Like there's something more there than meets the eye, right? So I'll bounce ideas off of her. I'll talk to her. I'll go and sit down and watch cartoons, or I'll go and smoke another joint, and hopefully I'd go to sleep. But sometimes it just doesn't work, and then I'm up. And then it wasn't until COVID, right, where I never even thought about starting a podcast until COVID hit. There was a couple things that happened. It was, Kobe Bryant dying, and then a artist named Joyner Lucas coming out, and he had this song, he had this rap lyric in there. He said, "Give them a rose while they're still here." Essentially saying you never know when it's somebody's time to go. Right. And then I was watching one of my favorite movies, and I was like, why don't I know that name? And then I started just Googling these names, like, why don't I know these people? This person grew up 30 minutes down the street from me, and he didn't create, excuse me, but he helped bring the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because you couldn't tell. It's a pretty sickening thing back there with the Ninja Turtles. The guy that helped bring the movie, the 1990 movie that Jim Henson helped produce and bring together with all the live action, the guy that helped with that, Gary Proper, is from 30 minutes down the street from me. This guy doesn't have a statue. Nobody, I didn't know who he was, and I'm a huge Turtles fan. And then just started this curiosity of like, wow, why couldn't I do this? And then last year, with so much time off with COVID, I was just looking for shit to do. And, I work in the restaurant industry, and we were hit so hard last year. Like the restaurant across the world, just everything, down the drain. And then, all of us were just trying to do something to keep ourselves busy, because, it's a 10, 12, 14-hour day when you work in a kitchen, and you have all of this time, and then your hands you don't know what to do with them, right? You're just sitting here like, you usually cutting something, you're usually frying something. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And it wasn't, first couple of weeks, I didn't want to touch a pan. I didn't want to touch a knife. I just wanted to relax. Right. And then I started feeling like, a crackhead, like, oh man, I'm getting that itch. Like, what is going on? Like, why do I have so much anxiety building up? Why am I waking up in a cold sweat? Why am I panicking? Why is my heart beating out of my chest? Like, why? And then you start to realize, like, oh shit, I've got all of this energy that I'm usually expending throughout the day, whether I'm cutting something, I'm frying something, I'm doing something that with this passion that I absolutely love. Like the craft and the art of cooking is just so beautiful, right? Like I told you earlier, you bond over TV shows, you bond over movies and music, but you bond over food too, right?
Well, yes, it's the great, well, let's have lunch, we'll figure it out. It's food is there, just not to nourish you, but also it's the third party in a conversation. You can always look down and cut another piece and start chewing if you have nothing to say. Mm-hmm. But also, if you're both enjoying something and then you start sharing food, it's magical. And if I may, just something you said struck me in that you were talking about seeing the names of people and wondering, who are these people? And all of them worked on this show. That's like eating you eat a dish, you eat something delicious, and you go, "This is delicious." Not many people are going to say, "What went into this?"
Yeah.
They're just gonna, they might say, "Oh, what's that sauce?" But you're sort of reverse engineering that in cooking.
Yeah.
Each of those ingredients is another name in the credits, and you are the executive producer and moving those pieces around and combining them, and then they collaborate in the final dish.
Yeah.
So it struck me as kind of poetic, the way we're talking about it. But I'm sorry, you were saying something else, so please go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah, no, you're fine. It's just like with cooking, like I just started to realize that, like, oh fuck, man, I'm not doing this thing that I've wanted to do since I was 12, right? For 20 years, I've been cooking, whether it's, I didn't start cooking professionally until 2016 when I got out of the military.
Mm.
Went to culinary school, so since 12 years old, roughly 2001, probably right before September 11th happened, um, I have just been balls deep into cooking, and it was just something that, it started with basketball. Like, I've got a very addictive personality. Like, I'll get into something and it's just balls to the wall. That's all I can think about. I don't
Yeah.
know why my brain works like that, but it's just like, until it's just run its course, I can't get it out of my head. I'm thinking about it when I go to sleep. I'm dreaming about it. I wake up and I'm still thinking about it. So it started with basketball. Basketball's still there. I just got all these different things that I absolutely love, but cooking has just been that constant. It's because there's nothing, and I'm pretty sure you can associate this to a song that you write for somebody, or you sing a song for somebody, or you play the piano for somebody, and giving somebody a dish, right, is everything that you are thinking, you're feeling, you want to convey to somebody. You're putting that on a plate. Right. And a lot of people don't like to cook because I don't think they can take rejection, because cooking is a very personal thing. Just like music, anything creative is a very personal thing, because you're taking whatever you're feeling inside, or whatever you're thinking about, or all the shit that's going on. You're trying to compartmentalize that and push your emotions through your fingertips and put it onto a plate. Just me using that as an example right now. You put it on a plate and you've given it to somebody. And then I got to imagine that you giving a song to somebody, you singing a song to somebody, is going to elicit that same kind of feeling. You're going to sit there and you're going to watch every micro expression that they're going to have, from the slightest raise of an eyebrow, or the smirk, or holy shit, this is so good. I've never had this before. I never thought I would like, let's just say, mushrooms the way I like mushrooms right now in this dish. And then you just feel... You feel the joy in them. And then it's like, I enjoy so much just cooking for my friends more than I enjoy, like, I don't enjoy going to work because it's a long drive, it's a long day, and all that other stuff. But I enjoy when somebody smiles when they eat my food, or they say, this is one of the greatest things I've ever had. It brings something out of you. Like I said, it's that emotion that you wear on your sleeve when you put something on a plate, or you put something on a music sheet. It feels so good.
Right. Well, that's, there's a very big difference, and again, I think there's an analog in what I do, and you put your finger on it with music. If I'm performing something, or as was the case in the neighborhood, I was listening to a far better singer than I am performing a song that I wrote to my wife. I started writing it for her birthday and finished it for her birthday 3 or 4 years later, because I had 4 really good lines at the beginning and I couldn't match them, and then finally I had to, like, dig in. But that's the same experience, or a similar experience, that here's this dish I prepared, and watching somebody eat that and enjoying their enjoyment. That's immediate. When I write a script, that script is miles away from fans, or viewers enjoying the finished product.
Yeah.
Every script has to be, for me, has to be a thing in and of itself. It's like, I finish something and I would hand this to you to read right now because I'm so happy with it, and it is in and of itself a thing. Most people wouldn't look at it that way. It's a blueprint, some would say, for what they're going to produce. A blueprint, perhaps, is not giving it enough credit, I think. But you don't get that response. I'm just getting the response. I'm just getting that feedback now for Courage, the Cowardly Dog, to bring the conversation to that. it's now, 20 plus years later, and it's only in recent years that I've realized what this has meant to people.
Yeah.
When especially with social media, when fans start sending me pictures of their tattoos of courage, and so,
What's the
it's like,
place you've seen a courage tattoo?
I'm sorry.
What's the weirdest place you've seen a courage tattoo?
Uh, in my living room, I was looking at it. That's where I was. It was an easy joke. No, I all over the body,
Yeah.
but mostly it's it's on an arm or a leg. But when I was at San Diego Comic-Con a bunch of years ago, and I was wearing my Courage T-shirt because you want somebody to stop. You're a writer. Nobody knows who I am until I say I did this, and I'm talking to this guy, and he just launched into a monologue from Courage in the Big Stinking City, Schwick the Cockroach, and he went into the guy's voice, and he just recited to me the lines I wrote,
Mhm.
and it was astounding. It's like somewhere out there in the world, a decade and a half prior to this meeting, he saw this cartoon, and here he is 15 or 17 years later reciting the dialogue to me. And also hearing, I was afraid when we were working on Courage, I was afraid that we might be making kids afraid. Because yeah, well, some of those episodes were very dark. Some were frothy, but some really twisted. And I have to say that a lot of it was very much like me getting in sync with how John was twisting things, and I was becoming happily twisted. But some of the most wonderful feedback I've gotten were fans of the show saying that they had really fucked up childhoods, and mom was a Muriel. She was trying her best, but she didn't see what a bastard dad was, and all sorts of crazy shit happened. And it was like bad people would show up, like the monsters on Courage, and I didn't know what to do with that. And then I would watch Courage, say these fans, and I would see, or I would identify with Courage, and I would see that he would survive this, and he does it for love, and he has forgiveness in his heart, and he has fear, but he overcomes it, and he deals with issues head on because he has to protect Muriel. If it was just him, he'd probably run, but he has to save, his beloved Muriel. And I heard one podcast in particular, this woman, and I don't even remember what. I wish I had noted it. It was beautifully produced. It had music in the background, and she was talking about and waxing rhapsodic about Courage, and almost poetically speaking about it. It was almost like a dream-like state she was in, and talking about how it filled so many holes in her childhood. So, we're doing the show, we're working hard, and we're just like, I'm not thinking, I always want to put things like empathy into anything I write. I'm a big fan of especially shows for younger children, showing examples of thinking about other people.
Yeah.
And not just being, because when you're like 3 or 4 years old, there's you, and then you start to think that, you have an effect on other people. But you don't, it took 20 years for me to see the smile on the face of the person I served that dish to.
Yes.
And to fully understand what it was I was doing, because when I'm doing it, I don't necessarily comprehend the totality of what it is, or what it will mean to people. And that's a wonderful feeling. And that is, for all the royalties and residuals I don't get from Courage, because it was not a Writers Guild covered show, and therefore you get paid once. If you have a song in it, you get your ASCAP or your BMI, and somehow there are these formulas where they're called foreign levies. I get mysterious checks every so often that come in through the Writers Guild from around the world, and it's like, oh, Courage has been playing in Denmark and Germany and Japan, and I have 18 cents from here and 22 cents and well, $130 from, they must be really big fans there. They must have coin slots on their TVs. But the you don't, and I don't want to go on a tear about the situation in children's animation, and how it differs, how the respect given to writers differs between television, primetime television, or animated series like the sitcoms, like the animated series like The Simpsons and Futurama, and how that differs from working on the best of, I've worked on Arthur and of course Courage and a bunch of other shows. But unless you're the head writer, it's hard to make a living writing. Just you really have to hustle.
Yeah.
To write enough scripts to make enough money to get through the year. People do have other jobs, so it's like, if you're the head writer, you're getting a steady paycheck for a certain period of time. You don't necessarily know how long that's going to be. But when you write a script, you get paid once and that's it. I still get residuals for episodes of Pee-wee's Playhouse that I wrote. By this point, they are, it is 12 cents, or whatever the formula is for streaming, or, it used to be DVDs. But the real payment is hearing what people have to say about something you wrote 20 years ago and they experienced when they were very young. And my favorite response, and I've heard this far more than once, is, wow, you really were the head writer for Courage the Cowardly Dog. Wow, that show fucked me up so bad. Thank you. Thank you. And I didn't realize the value of fucked upness. I mean, as a writer, as an artist, we're all a little fucked up. We're all a little crazy. You're a little fucked up, and that makes you great. But fucked up in that good way, yeah. In that artistic way. And I had an experience. This is around the corner from where I live. I was in this outside standing in the subway station before you go in through the turnstiles, and there were like 3 or 4. There's a dorm that serves several colleges right there, and there were like 4 or 5. And this was 10 years ago, and they were in their late teens, and they were all smoking cigarettes, and it was pissing me off. I mean, I quit smoking when I was in my 20s, and I know it isn't easy, and lung cancer took my mother, and because of cigarettes. One would assume from how much she smoked. But I saw these kids, and I heard myself saying to them, I mean, it was like ridiculous that I would just burst out with this. I just said, will you just stop smoking? Will you just stop smoking before you can't stop smoking? And they looked at me like I was fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And I saw the look in their eyes, and it's like, and who is this old man? And this was, 10 years ago. And so I was, but to them, it's like, who is this dad who's telling us not to smoke? And I just said, they hardly said anything to me, which bothered me. But I understood it. And I took it further, and I said, hey, and one more thing. Did any of you ever see Courage the Cowardly Dog? And then they looked shocked, and I said, yeah. Why? And I said, well, I was the head writer on that. Oh my God, that's our favorite show. That's it. They threw their cigarettes down on the ground, all of them, and put them out. And I said, wow, that's one of the best results of working on that show I've ever seen. I don't know that you'll never light another cigarette, but for God's sake, think of me when you do, and don't, you know. So, you know, I don't know that I saved them from a life of smoking, but for that moment, I felt like a hero. And it was just because I wasn't even bragging. I wasn't looking for, you know, I didn't want to be idolized. It wasn't like I was at a convention and I'm just enjoying the fans and all of that. I just didn't want them to smoke. And I guess on some level, I knew that if they were fans of the show, they'd dig me for having worked on the show. And I didn't know they would immediately put the cigarettes out. It was amazing. It was amazing to watch 5 cigarettes hit the ground and 5 feet stomp them out all at the same time. You know, that would I trade that for residual checks? Yeah, maybe.
Well, I mean,
but I, you know what? I don't have to. It's like that's just a false question I'm asking myself. I can get residuals and tell people to stop smoking.
yeah.
because I worked on Courage, you know. I don't know. The calculus for that kind of situation is really strange.
I really enjoyed that story, man, because I want to imagine that we're in a world where if the head writer from Courage the Cowardly Dog comes up and says, "Hey, man, smoking's bad," you're like, "Holy shit! This guy not only shaped my childhood and made it fucked up, but he's trying to save me from an even more fucked up ending if I keep smoking cigarettes. So I'm just gonna have to splash these buds out, and I'm never gonna smoke a cigarette again." So, man, you save those kids is what I'm gonna get at. I'm not even gonna speculate. You save those 5 kids from getting, you know, some fucked up shit happen to them. But here, man, we really broke the fuck meter today, haven't we, man? But it's okay.
Yeah, I don't usually launch into my fuckery, but you've encouraged me to, so I'm letting loose.
Well,
I love cursing. I love foul language.
It's really, like I've mentioned it a few times. It's like the salt and pepper of conversations, man. You just sprinkle it in a little bit here, and it just peps up the talk. You hit a little F here, a little B here, a little C here, a little A here. You know, it livens up. Like life is full of color. Like if you look back at that painting, life's full of color, and that's what swearing is. It's colorful language. It's meant to emphasize a point, or meant to drive home a point, I guess. I mean, both of them really mean emphasizing, but nonetheless, man. So as we start to
but it has to be done artfully. There are people who abuse you know, foul language. They make it all the more foul. No, it needs to be, as you're saying, elevated to the level of seasoning.
Yes. Like I said, it's the salt and pepper of conversations, man. So we've been going for about an hour and a half, and I feel like we've hit quite a bit of topics. And
well, let's talk more about Courage. I mean, ask me some good Courage questions or things fans wanted to know. So
here, before I get to those fans questions, because there is some about Courage that I would absolutely love to know. As far as, and obviously you can't speak for every writer, because every writer, every person in a creative field and creative endeavor has a different method, right? So specifically for you, as far as these questions will go, when you try to get into that headspace of that character, obviously when you're coming onto the show, you didn't create the show, but you're trying to, like you said, you're trying to sync up frequencies with John to see what he's kind of looking for, what the executives are looking for, and you know what everybody, you're just trying to be copacetic. You're trying to make sure everything's flowing together. With that being said, when you guys would sit around the table and bang out story ideas or try to come up with stuff to put Courage in peril, what would those situations look like? Would you guys just start with Courage is going to be chased by Freaky Fred, so go? But how was it? Like, what would go into it?
Well, you know, it's different for, like, every episode is a little different from every other episode, and every writer, you know, we had 3 people who were at the table with me. One of them was John's sister, who was really lovely and a wonderful writer. I was very happy and relieved. You know, it was like, I want John's sister to be really great because John hired her to sit with me and work on, you know. So it was like we had, and 2 other people at the table to help shape the stories, and then the freelancer would come in. And we were working off of, as I mentioned before, a short idea 99 out of 100 times it came from John and was approved by the network. So we knew that the story in its essence and in its broad strokes was good to go. And then, and sometimes, sometimes it kind of like suggested itself in a wonderfully linear way. And sometimes it would feel like I was connecting dots that have no numbers, in order to make a picture. And it's not to say anything bad about what John was doing. This is true of any show I've worked on. It's like sometimes it's all there right at the beginning, and sometimes the essence of it is there, but you have to find the material, the physical way to make it work as a story. And you mentioned sort of like getting, tuning into the frequency of what the show is. You get inside the characters. You have to be those characters. One of the things that Roger and I as partners were always good at, and individually we're good at, is capturing the voice of performers. We've been fortunate enough. I mean, just a slight tangent, but just to illustrate the point, I worked on a sitcom that starred Madeline Kahn and George C. Scott. And George C. Scott plays the president of the United States. Madeline Kahn plays his sister-in-law who's in love with him, and his wife had left him, so she moves into the White House. And it was briefly on Fox in the 80s. But writing for Madeline Kahn and George C. Scott, but Madeline, it was like writing for Yo-Yo Ma and his cello. It's like I could hear the music of her voice in my head. And it was very intimate, sharing that character with her. I didn't have an affair with Madeline Kahn. I'd been to her house, and she was a lovely woman and would call me up on a Saturday to apologize for George C. Scott yelling at me on a Friday. And I said, "Oh, you didn't have to do that. George C. Scott yelling at me is like a badge of honor." It's like, because I sat down at the table with the writers in the commissary, and he said, "This table's for writers. This table's for actors, not writers." And then she called me the next day and said, "I'm so sorry he said that. You could have sat with me." She was a doll. But there was something just so, as I said, intimate and oddly collaborative, in that I was handing a script to her. And she rarely varied from what Roger and I wrote. She might throw something in, but she would perform it and just raise it. And I wrote about it once, the experience, and I said it was like, here's a piece of paper, that's the script, and then she would fold it into an airplane and it would fly. And she wouldn't throw it away. I mean that metaphorically. She wouldn't like say, "Oh, nice script, guys." No, that George would have done that. But
sounds like.
Well, he actually did compliment us once through. He opened the back of his car, the limo that was driving him off the lot. The window opened in the back just this much, and I heard it. And he said, "Good script, guys." And I was like, wow, I didn't even know George was in the car. I'm assuming it's him. It sounds like him. But, and the same is true for Muriel. I mean, her voice was one that really infused me. Courage didn't speak much, but I still knew his character so well, and the anxieties. And now that I think about it, I tapped into some of my childhood anxieties and current anxieties at the time, to ask myself, how would I react to this kind of situation, or what would scare me? And often when I'm working with other writers, and if I'm in charge of the table, I'll say, everybody's struggling to come up with, how does the story work? And I'll just say, tell me the scariest thing that happened to you when you were a kid and how you felt. Or if you have kids, tell me about something they went through. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the story. Just let's loosen up and talk about our lives and talk about real feelings. And if it's a cartoon or a stage play or a movie or a sitcom or an hour-long drama or any one of 19 other forms of television that there are now, you know, if characters aren't behaving like human beings, you can feel it.
Mhm.
Uh, and it doesn't matter if they're anthropomorphic, like a dog. I've written a lot of dogs. Um, but you know, you want to be able, as a writer, you want to feel what the character is feeling, and it works up to a point. And sometimes it does become a little more mechanical if we're hurrying up and all of that. And for writers who aren't, there's the thing I mentioned about the revolving door of freelancers, but you would have freelancers who you saw got the show
Yeah.
and were good at capturing the voices, and you'd bring them back for more scripts and they get better and better and better. But working with a staff of writers who are there all the time working on the show is more productive. I mean, it's just you really get a good rhythm going, and people do wind up knowing the writers wind up knowing the show that much better, and they're seeing more of the process because they're always there
Yeah.
every day. You know, if I could change things, I would. But you know, we work with what we've got, and it's I actually forgot the question that you asked originally, but
Your process and how you would break down an episode, or how you got
oh
stuff.
yeah, it character. I'm going to say something that writers will hear and say, of course, whether they actually believe it or not, or practice it or not, but story comes from character. Um, that's why situation comedy always bothered me. Character comedy, my favorite sitcoms were character comedies,
Yeah.
character coms, cat coms. I guess sitcom is a better sounding word. But the if you're having trouble finding out where a story is going, ask yourself what would challenge this character the most. What another great thing to do is like, what kind of obsession would this character have? Obsession is a wonderful tool for a writer.
Yeah.
The movie The Conversation, Gene Hackman, Coppola directed, I think. Just a wonderful film, and it's just a man who's growing more and more and more obsessed. It's just a rising degree of obsession to the very last scene, and I won't spoil it for anybody, but it, you know, obsession leads you to it leads you past the object of your obsession, and it leads you into a dark place. So you challenge the characters to get good stories going. You have to understand what motivates the characters and what the characters fear, and why they have to overcome this fear, which was built into courage. Um, and that's, you know, so if there's any one thing that I would do or try to do for every episode, it's that each episode presented different situations and different, you know, complications, um, and you have to be elastic enough to work, you know,
within those confines.
right. You know, suddenly you're dealing with an episode that's very different from another episode, and it's like, oh, in this one we can't ask the same. It's like you have to ask a different set of questions, but under it all is still, you know, are these characters being true to who they are? You'll often see season one of a show. My wife and I have been binging Star Trek, the original series, Star Trek TOS, the original series, and because she never watched them from the beginning, and I did, and she was marveling at how the sort of the characters became more specific as the show went on, and some of the first season episodes were shown were broadcast out of order. So it jumped around a little bit. But if you look at season one of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the characters are painted with a pretty broad brush, certainly Ted Baxter. And then you move into later seasons, and they become much more articulated and much more real. The writers, the actors, everyone's still looking for exactly who the character was. You know, we knew who Mary Richards was from the very beginning, but even her character at the center of the show had to had to grow. I mean, it's inevitable. You know, if you're doing more than one season, and then you could, you know, if you look at it's sometimes looking at the first few episodes of any kind of show makes you go, huh, that doesn't even feel quite like it's the show, but but it's like, growing up, you're still the same person, but you're more articulated.
Yeah, you haven't seen any shit yet. You need perspective. You need to be able to grow. You need to be able to evolve. Right.
Right. And that's, true for characters in a show and or in a cartoon or in a movie. I mean, but certainly in television specifically, where you have, a movie is like one big arc through the end. And, when this is one of the reasons I really enjoy, I'm gesturing towards where my television is right now.
Yeah.
I really enjoy these long, like 8-episode series that are really long movies, because they allow the people making them to craft something that has the character, sort of like a longer period of time to develop the characters and go deeper into them.
Yeah.
Than a movie would allow. I mean, you can get very deep into it. I mean, not to demean movies. A brilliant movie is a brilliant movie, but there's something just so wonderful about, watching, 8 or 10 episodes that arc like a film and yet play like a television series where the characters are, and it's a different kind of growth, because it's kind of like, it's all pretty concretized, I would imagine, in most cases from the beginning. You kind of know where it's going. If you're doing an episodic series and you're in season 1 or 2 and you don't even know how many seasons you're going to go, that's a different kind of evolution, because you as an artist, a writer, whatever, a contributor to the show, an actor, you're feeling things change because you're discovering things as you go along. And that's one of the greatest parts about working in series television, I think, is letting go of things that, and it's usually subtle. It's very subtle. It's not like, big things, but and some shows just stay broad, and dopey. Some shows stay like the first season. I mean, it's just not my favorite flavor of television. I think Alf was one of the most sitcoms that I worked on. Living Single also is a traditional ensemble sitcom that I worked on. And those aren't the shows that I'm naturally drawn to. I loved writing the show, and I love the show Living Single. I thought it was wonderful, and it was a wonderful experience being invited into culturally in being embraced. This was in the early 90s and mid 90s, actually, to the later 90s. You talk about diversity now.
Yeah.
I was, Roger and I were 2 white Jewish guys from Brooklyn, and you looked around the table and it was it felt like the United Nations in a way. It was wonderful. I mean, it was like a bouquet, and it was a privilege. It really was a privilege working, because another thing about a writer's life is, you can stay in your comfort zone and you can just work on, if you're successful and you're lucky and you're talented, you continue along and you can work in, but people find their comfort zone and they stay in it.
Yes.
And they make a gazillion dollars doing it. Certain people make $1 bazillion. Some make $1 million, but some make a few bucks. But still, for me, and one of the reasons I like having done so many different kinds of things and worked on different kinds of shows is the experience of it's almost like being you know, I don't want to say like a documentarian is like, you know, they do what they do and they, you know, do it really well, and I'm not that, but you're entering a different environment, you're dealing with different people, you're addressing, and certainly with Living Single I was very aware of it being a black show, uh and part of Fox's, you know, there was Martin in Living Color, Living Single, and you really felt like you were part of something that was happening, that was new and fresh and invigorating. And you know, the compliments that Roger and I received on Living Single stay with me as well, because and you don't even need a compliment if you continue work, if you're hired to work on the show again, you know, if they like what you did, that's a compliment. um you know, you know, I feel it in my heart, and now it's like I feel like I had this experience that most writers don't have, because it's like they live a homogeneous life, and this was very heterogeneous and very inspiring, and it helped me. I mean, you know, it was during Living Single that we moved back to New York after the Northridge earthquake in 1994, because that finally gave us the all-encompassing fear to gather the courage to move back to New York, which is exactly what courage the cowardly dog must face. I just realized as I said it. It's like, oh my God, I'm so scared. We ran away, actually. The courage would have stayed there and made the earthquake stop somehow, or lifted Muriel, you know, above him while floating on a helium balloon so that they weren't rocking and rolling on the ground.
Things he'll do
Um,
for love.
what? I'm sorry.
Things he'll do for love.
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, so it's just interesting. I mean, talking to you, I'm getting sort of a sense of of the progression of my career that I haven't really thought about. But I won't dwell on it too much for now, because I don't know. I'll fall deeper into therapy mode, and you
Well,
don't want to see me weep.
that I absolutely love, man. In Living Color, I actually had to sneak around and watch this because when In Living Color came out, I was blown away. Like I had seen, I don't even know if I had seen, you know, Jim Carrey, one of Jim Carrey's first movies that I remember, like The Mask or Ace Ventura. I'm pretty sure this is years after this. I want to assume, from you know his initial run on In Living Color, but that and a little show called Rocco's Modern Life. When I was,
Yeah.
I would have to like sneak around and watch because my mom would not, my mom would watch In Living Color with my older sister every single week. I
Mm.
was still way too young to be watching that. You know, you had Jamie Foxx as LaWanda, and then you had Fire Marshal Bill. And I remember because walking into the house when I was younger, in the house we lived in when I was in elementary school, and I was, you know, sneaking around to watch the show. They had the couch and it was facing away from the TV, as most couches are. So you had TV and then you had couch behind it. So I would come around and I would poke my head, you know, above the little couch, and I would watch it. And I would laughing. And I remember them catching me like, what are you doing? You're not supposed to be watching this shit. Go to bed. You're too young for this shit. So ever since then, I would just sneak around, watch that. Rocco's Modern Life, and then when we had HBO, before my mom realized we had HBO, because back then you had to sign up for these packages.
Right.
You didn't know you were getting billed for shit until you got billed for shit. They had Def Comedy Jam on there, and I remember seeing, you know, Earthquake for the first time, and just these great comedians. Then getting my mom catching me watching the shit I should be watching, like these comedians like In Living Color and Martin, just stuff that was too grown for me at that time. And that show does not get brought up enough, man. I really loved that show. But kind of segueing, because you brought up her name a couple times, Muriel and Thea White, right?
Yeah.
So the late great Thea White, we just lost her not too long ago.
Yeah.
Obviously, for the ladies and gentlemen that are watching that don't know, that this is the voice of Muriel. And one thing that I started doing back when I had a few of the '87 Ninja Turtle cartoon cast and crew on, I started asking them about a guy that is also no longer with us. James Avery played Uncle Phil in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, right? He was everybody's
Yeah.
father figure for my age bracket. Everybody wanted a dad like Uncle Phil. And, I'd ask them, like, what was your favorite story, about Uncle Phil, or, as we knew, James Avery. But I got to imagine, you being on that show for a little bit, Courage the Cowardly Dog, and then writing for all of these characters. I got to imagine you'd had a few run-ins with Miss Thea White. You got a favorite story, or whenever you hear her,
Yeah.
think about her. You got one that you just really you love to write about.
Yeah. Well, any time with Thea was a pleasure. She was just a delightful human, so happy to be doing what she was doing, so gifted. And she wasn't Scottish. She was married to a Scot. And my favorite story is really more about her husband.
Yeah.
And it was at a Courage party, and she introduces me to her husband, like her, just sweetness, exuding sweetness and humility.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "This is my husband, Andy White." And I said, "Oh, how do you do?" I said, "You share a very famous name in my book of fame. The drummer who George Martin subbed for Ringo on Love Me Do and is it Please Please Me? One of the early records. George Martin wasn't satisfied with what Ringo was doing, I believe, and brought in this fellow Andy White, who was a session drummer and well respected. And you can hear the difference. The album version versus the single version of the song. One is Ringo, one is Andy White. And so you see, I'm obsessed with the Beatles and I'm obsessed with this. So I'm telling this fellow the same, and I'm trying to explain who this guy is. And I finish shorter than this story, but I say, yeah, he subbed for Ringo. George Martin brought him in to sub for Ringo on 2 early recordings, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was me." And I said, "Oh shit, you're a Beatle. You're Andy White." Thea, did you know this? Do you know your husband is Andy White? Is that Andy White? Do you? And he was just so sweet about it. And although I prefer Ringo's drumming on those early records, Andy also played drums. I just learned, Jody Gray told me, he also played drums on a lot of Tom Jones records. On It's Not Unusual. A lot of, you've heard his drumming if you've listened to the music, particularly of the 60s that came out of England. He was the guy, he was the Hal Blaine. He was the session drummer of if George Martin picked him, he had to be good. Sounds like my favorite moment, a great show business moment. And then when I saw Thea at the Courage 20th anniversary party, it was the last time I saw her, and Andy had passed on at the time. And it was just so touching because she really missed him. I mean, I felt, I asked how she was doing, because when he died, it's like, it was in the news. It wasn't big news. It wasn't like, one of the Fab Four dying, but, it was notable. And she really got teary, and, I could feel her, and she's kind of like, I was holding her because she missed him so much. And I was telling her, I was talking to her about having, the time I met him, and I might have seen him a couple of other times. I mean, we weren't buddies or anything, but Thea was so genuine and honest and real, down to earth, and youthful. She just had, she never felt like she was getting older. Muriel was older than Thea, but she brought so much of herself to that role, so much of the joy that she experienced in life. And, to play somebody who doesn't really see evil until it's, the flames are licking at her, legs. You know, it's got to come from somewhere, and you know, the way she performed the character informed how we wrote the character, and I could tell that she was taking certain there were certain words she would say that you know, I said this will sound good, you know, and she would. I remember saying like she would walk into a situation uh, and just say, "Oh, this is so authentic."
Mhm.
Her character, Muriel, would say, "This is so authentic." I'm not doing that accent well, but the word was authentic, if in case that wasn't clear. And it wasn't like, you know, a catchphrase that everybody quoted, but I used it more than twice. Uh, and, you know, it really, you know, I loved Thea and I loved Muriel. They both inhabited the same orb of loveliness, uh, you know, and I hold that dear to my heart. And you know, I think about Madeline Kahn that way. You know, I found the bench that's dedicated to Madeline Kahn in Central Park. There's little plaques on the benches in Central Park, and there's one that's dedicated to Madeline Kahn. And it was just a joy sitting on that bench. This is dedicated by her husband or somebody close to her. Um, you know, and it's if you've had as a scriptwriter, if you're fortunate, you know, there's sometimes there's a divide between the writers and producers and the actors.
Mhm.
So many times, especially in sitcoms, you know, it's like you feel like this is color war. You know, this is team A against team B. Um, but it's not always the case. And if you're fortunate, you're really sharing, as I said before, you're sharing something very intimate. You're sharing a character with a performer, with an actor.
Mhm.
And then it goes even beyond that to the music that's laid into to the movement, to the direction, to the, you know, the colors the character might turn if they're angry or upset. Um, and it because, you know, the character becomes fully dimensional and shared. You know, people will identify, of course, the actor as the character, and writers who work in the silence of their heads or in the creative clutter of a writer's room, you know, they're not, you know, they're trying to serve that, but you know, it's like, you know, I keep on trying to come back to food, to cooking analogies, because it's like I'm very turned on by that idea, you know, comparing the, you know, your culinary work with my writing. Um, but it's like, you know, all right, you're the executive producer, but I'm several of the spices.
Mhm.
You know, she's the stock, she's the meat, she's the, you know, but you know, we're all in the soup together.
Yes.
You know, the soup is a collection of things. So that's, yeah, it's Soup Kitchen Productions. That's what I should name.
That's the name of your book right there, Soup Kitchen Productions.
I'll, I'll think about that. First, I got to write it. I have so many titles that have nothing following them. I don't even want to put by me after it because it's not written yet. So there's nothing by, you know,
I mean,
just the title.
it's all got to start somewhere. And before we get off of the, and we got some fans questions we'll get to here in
Sure.
just a second, but if it wasn't for John, because John had said something on Twitter, and I think he had just posted, and we had this talk earlier. It was the GIF of Muriel, too much macaroni, too cheesy, not enough cheese, too much macaroni. Right? He
Yeah.
posted something on Twitter, and then I had made the comment underneath it and said, "This hits harder when you have kids." Seeing this as a kid was funny because you're like, oh, I probably did that as a kid. Seeing that 20 years later, whatever it was, and having a kid and seeing your kid actually do that, you're like, holy shit, this must have happened to whoever wrote this. And he wrote three little words. He wrote David Steven Cohen. That's all he wrote. And going like, holy shit, why haven't I reached out to David yet? And I reached out to you and you came on the podcast, and I wanted to ask you this. How did that come about? Now, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, there was an episode where I can't remember the whole thing, but Muriel essentially, well, you wrote it. Shit, man.
Little Muriel.
Muriel, tell us about this.
Well, it came from idea of John's, and I forget exactly how specific it was, but the idea was Muriel somehow winds up going through a tornado and is transformed into her young self. A little side note there. At that 20th anniversary reunion, I was complimenting Thea on her performance, but it wasn't her.
Really?
She said that John wanted she said, he said that she didn't, I could be getting it wrong. So, but there was, it's like she wasn't sounding, and I understand this, she wasn't sounding young enough and they didn't want to tweak her voice. Maybe, I don't know. And I didn't want to ask her too much about it because I didn't know if it was a sore spot.
Yeah.
But I know that it's a heavily memed moment in the cartoon, and I vividly remember writing it, and it was in part, yes, my experience with my children. My kids at the time were, I guess, about 10 and 5, so they'd been through a lot of macaroni and cheese experiences. and then I just, tweaked it a bit. And I thought about kids who were far nastier than mine, and how, Courage as the surrogate parent now to his surrogate mother, has to deal with this. And, he doesn't want to yell at her, but you want to just like,
oh, yeah.
give her a timeout. But I just remember the rhythm of it and writing it, and more, more cheese, more macaroni, more cheese, not enough cheese, not enough macaroni. And then just, I hate macaroni and cheese. This is like the closest I can come to doing the accent is that one, because I've heard that scene over and over and over again. There's a wonderful distortion of that scene on YouTube that I've seen, where it's just like slowed down and sped up and turned upside down. It's like, too much macaroni, not enough cheese, too much cheese, not enough macaroni. And it's like very, I mean, it's perfect for Courage, to if it were a different kind of character, that's what the way the voice would have gone, but yeah, that's exactly what kids would do, and this was not an empathetic child. This is a child pre-empathy. Muriel is extremely empathetic as an adult. She learned something. So that, yeah, I don't remember if the macaroni and cheese incident in its entirety. I don't remember where, if I came up with the idea. I remember executing the idea.
Yeah.
I remember writing it. And usually I remember if I thought of it, but it feels so much like it's in the ether now. I don't remember if it came from me or John, sort of as a conception. And it was very sweet of him to point you in my direction, and for him to remember that was, something that came from me, and I had kids, and he knew it. And it was interesting, my experience with my older son when he was about 11 or 12, and Courage was on the air. Like any good 11 or 12-year-old son, he didn't want his friends to know what his dad did because it wouldn't be cool.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm working on a TV show that they watch. What's cooler than that? So, but I didn't want to upset Julian, and it's my son's wonderful name, Julian. It's a beautiful name. And not incidentally, the name of John Lennon's first son. But I was picking him up at a party and driving home a bunch of his friends in the station wagon. And Julian was sitting next to me in the front seat. And I said, Julian, you're going to have to forgive me for this. And I hope you won't even need to. And I turned slightly, I think I was at a stoplight. And I turned around and said, do any of you guys watch Courage the Cowardly Dog? And they went, yeah, oh, it's like my favorite show. I love that show. I was like, and it turned Julian's head around a little bit, I think, because I don't think he talked about it much. Mm-hmm. And then it was fine to talk about. And one of my favorite, a little show business anecdote, and this is what, like, again, it takes the place of residuals. Julian and Gabe, my younger son, they went to St. Anne's School in Brooklyn Heights, which is notable for celebrities and their children, and children who become celebrities, like Lena Dunham went to St. Anne's. She worked in the video store. I used to rent tapes from her, neighborhood girl. And Julian, in 6th grade, I think, 7th grade, was in a class with a wonderful girl named Charlotte Simpson, who Sigourney Weaver's daughter. Mm. And my wife and I went to a parents' gathering at someone's home, as one does when you have kids in school. And most of us are civilians, not on this. And Sigourney Weaver is there. And she's just being a mom, she's just being a parent, a school parent. And I introduced myself to her because Julian had told me that Charlotte, that her daughter was a fan of the show. And I said, I'm Julian's dad. And because I knew she knew him. And Sigourney Weaver threw her arms around me and said, oh my God, I love your work. I love that show. And I'm standing there, and it's in the middle of this, like, just parents buffet and talking. And I'm saying, oh, wow, Sigourney Weaver, if I ever thought about meeting you, it didn't go like this. It was kind of reversed, because I'm fighting every fiber in my body right now to not throw my arms around you and say the same thing. And she said, oh, no, it's a treasure. It's a treasure. We love watching it together. And I said, thank God, did you watch it with her? Because some of it is, she said, yeah, some of it's creepy. And I was like, wow, Ripley, it's like, I could sell this moment on eBay.
The most bad woman in cinematic history gave you a hug and said she likes your work, David.
Yeah. And Billy Bob Thornton, and this is just like in the news. This didn't happen to me. It just blew in my direction. Billy Bob Thornton was married to
Angelina Jolie for a little while.
Well, what?
Angelina Jolie.
Yeah, Angelina Jolie. Right. Thank you. Billy Bob said in an interview, I swear, it went something like, I think Jody repeated it to me. I don't know if I ever heard him say it, but he said, oh yeah, Angie, or whatever you called Angelina, and I, we just like to sit down, fuck, and watch Courage the Cowardly Dog.
If you don't put that on your resume, I'm gonna be upset.
Yeah, it's really hard, and to work that in, to a casual, job interview, but it's like, wow, it's almost like I had a threesome with Billy Bob and Angelina. Except it was just my writing that did. So, nobody got, disturbed by it. So it's you don't know who's watching, and I know that there are fans of the things that I do, that there are people I'm a fan of so devotedly, and they might be a fan of my work.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, which slice of my work, but Courage certainly, uh Pee-wee's Playhouse, yeah, that was important, but Courage just hit like right at the right time with the right, like group of kids growing up, to deliver me 20 years later, or during the time it was on the air with Sigourney. um, wow. And then I got another moment that I which fed off of that. I went to see Sigourney in a play in her husband's theater, which she directed, and it was a lovely little play. John Lithgow played a teacher, and Sigourney played a student, and the classroom was the audience. It was a small theater, so the front had a couple of the actors in it, and Sigourney, but we were the class, and we weren't supposed to talk. It was a nice little play, and then we were hanging out afterwards with Sigourney in the lobby and just talking to her and saying how much we enjoyed it and thank you, for inviting us to see it. And Leonard Nimoy walked over and said, "Hey, Sigourney, how are you?" And "Oh, Leonard." And she probably introduced me, but what I remember about that was, their hello is I'm watching Spock and Ripley embracing each other, and I'm just standing there going, "Oh my God." I'm the only one in the world seeing this right now. Somebody else look. Somebody get a camera. I mean, I didn't have a phone camera at the time, because it was just long enough ago to precede phone cams. But and not, for all I know, Leonard Nimoy was a Courage fan too. I don't know, but I did get to write a little bit of stuff for William Shatner in recent years. So my connection, my Trek connection is pretty strong. But yeah, I mean, there's that, which is glorious, and then there's the fans who don't have to be famous, are famous in my heart, and it means every bit as much to me as a moment of glory with someone of Sigourney Weaver's stature and refined taste.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, it's such that's a gift, as a writer, because and as you can tell, I like to talk, and I'm outgoing, and a lot of writers aren't, and just kind of shy and retiring, or apparently so. And I suspect they don't get or maybe they don't need it as much. Do I need this stuff? Is it feeding my ego? Yes. But it's nothing that I was looking for. I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know that kind of feedback existed. I didn't know that kind of love for the work existed. And they don't know me. If they did, I'd like to think they'd like me, but I know it's the work, but that's part of me. That's a huge part of me. I can't separate myself from, people always say, don't get emotionally invested in that work. And it's good advice. And I can try to take it, but I can never really separate myself from the work that I do and how much it means to me. And, don't take it personally. We're just giving you, okay, I won't take it personally. I'll just take it personally and professionally. I'll deal with it professionally, but I'm taking it because this is, that's an extension of me. That's, I wonder what I'd be without all of that. I can look back on what I've done and look at what I'm doing now, and it helps me define who I am. When I write a song, particularly write a song that comes out of somewhere I didn't expect, I'm for myself. It's like, wow, I got to get in touch with this part of me that just like crawled out from the hiding place. During the pandemic, John Prine died early on in the pandemic from COVID. Uh, Wonderful songwriter and cancer survivor several times over, and fucking COVID took him. And I listened to nothing but John Prine. I mean, 90%, 95% of the music I listened to for the entire quarantine period was John Prine.
Yeah.
And I started writing songs. I was tuning to his frequency, not just enjoying it. And one day I wrote a song, and it was like so John Prine, and I would never have written it had I not just absorbed all of that so intensely. And it's quite like, it's sort of collaborative in a way, like I'm imagining. I wasn't even thinking hard about what would John Prine do when I was first diving into it. And then I got a little more like, I would ask myself like I'd be dissatisfied with a moment in the song, and it's kind of funny, funny song and character based. And I would just say, okay, what would John Prine do here?
Yeah.
Okay. He would take a left turn, and I'm going to take a left turn too, mm-hmm. and that was really, it was kind of stunning. But as an artist, if you're not discovering yourself in pieces and bits as you go through your career with what you do, if you're not seeing yourself in your work and you're not finding new parts of yourself in your work, I don't think you're looking closely enough, or you're not reflecting enough. And that's like I said, you don't have time to reflect while you're in production.
Yeah.
But after I write a song, I can sit back and say, oh, okay, that's a thing. What have I learned about myself? Or what colors have I added to my palette, that allowed me to write the song? Because the songs I'm writing now, I would not have been writing 10 years ago. It's I really do see a progression of development there, and it's
all about
me a lot more.
We talked about earlier.
It's
all about that word we talked about earlier. It's about perspective. It's about how you look at it, what you've been through, diversity and adversity, and all that other shit, man. It's how you get shaped. It's how we're formed. It's how you form yourself, and how you form yourself off of other people. It's life. Right? Life is crazy. Life is messy, but life makes people. So it's an interesting, I don't even know if dichotomy is the right word, but it's an interesting ride, if nothing else.
Absolutely. And, perspective is in short supply often. And we're fortunate, during the down periods, it's like sometimes like between projects, I'll be distraught. It's like, I should be working.
Yeah.
No, I really should be reflecting. I should be gaining perspective. I should be maybe doing something else that I really want to do artistically, creatively. So I don't necessarily gain perspective when I should, but yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting sort of marker, series of markers of your growth in your life. And I have to say that early on, I mean, I could still look at that first script that Roger and I wrote that Steve Martin liked so much, for the project he was working on. He was the executive producer of it. And it was a series of half-hour films, each of which was actually a pilot for its own series. It was an anthology comedy series hosted by George Burns. So that's my show business lineage goes back to vaudeville, because at the very beginning of my career, I worked with the very end of George Burns, and right smack in the middle of Steve Martin. But it was it really was. I have to say, it was a pretty mature script for two young writers writing their first script. I mean, it's not a big surprise. I met Roger in college. He was the editor of the school newspaper. I was the editor of the literary magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So we were writers, and he became a journalist, and I was freelancing. I was writing the Daily Archie comic strip for a little while. I was writing movie reviews for Muppet Magazine in the voices of Statler and Waldorf. It was, Statler and Waldorf is told to David Cohen, and I didn't even use my middle name at the time, until I learned there's just like, there were 12 of me in every building, and David X. Cohen of Futurama is actually David S. Cohen. If you look at his early Simpsons credits before they became Writers Guild, he had to change his middle initial because when he joined the Writers Guild, he found out there was a David S. Cohen. And for some reason, the Writers Guild says you can be David Cohen, you could be David Steven Cohen, but if somebody has David S. Cohen, that's sacrosanct. Name, middle initial, last name can belong to one person only.
There can only be one.
Right. So David Samuel Cohen, which is David X. Cohen, was faced with a perplexing situation, which is, okay, I would like to come up with a different middle initial. Let me do X. And he was then forced to talk about me in every interview he did thereafter, because what does the X stand for? And I got his Emmy tickets once. I sat with the Simpsons. He wasn't attending, but I had his seats. So I sat with my friends who wrote on The Simpsons. I didn't win the Emmy that time. They did. Yeah. So I was like, I wanted to go to the stage with them and say, I could take home a David Cohen Emmy, although you don't really take it home. It's delivered, sent to you. And I still to this day will see on my ASCAP, quarterly reports, like there's an Itchy and Scratchy queue that I'm getting 18 cents for. And I suspect there's a Courage the Cowardly Dog queue he's getting 18 cents for. So although he needs the 18 cents less than I do, given the fact that he created Futurama and worked on The Simpsons. I think we owe each other several large cups, several venti-sized coffees, if we ever sit down in the same place at the same time.
Well, I hope he sees this, and I hope that happens, man. I'd like for you to get your money and get his money.
Well, I don't think either of us is to untangle that. I mean, there's so much to untangle as far as credits are concerned. For a while, my IMDb page had my guest starring appearance on Baywatch, which never happened. It wasn't me. And it was just very funny because it was like, some guy in a tiny bathing suit, which wouldn't have been me, and I just enjoyed leaving it there. IMDb also was, I don't know if it still does, credits Ringo Starr with being one of the Duck brothers on Courage the Cowardly Dog. And let me put it this way. When somebody says a Beatle was singing the song you wrote, you hesitate before you correct them.
Yeah.
I won't say it wasn't Ringo. I will say it was me. It was Will Ryan. And did John sing along also? I forget, because there's only two Duck brothers. No, Jody Gray was singing with us. Yeah. Because Will and Jody sing better than I do. Will Ryan did a lot of voices on the show. He worked with me on the Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss before that. And I knew him from when I lived in LA, and he's an animation guy and a musician and absolutely wonderful. So for all of you who want to believe that Ringo was a Duck brother, please. It was Ringo if you want. But the truth is, it could have been Andy White. It could have been another Beatle drummer. Yeah. If we wanted it to be him, we had access to. But it's when you're doing this and you have a common name, it's just very funny. Yeah. It's just, and people sometimes I'll have to like make sure you realize that I'm the Courage the Cowardly Dog guy and not the Futurama guy, right? You're saying you like my work and not his. I just want to know how to react. You can. Yeah. It's okay if you're a fan of his and you don't know me. That's fine. I just want to know what I'm responding to here. It's I have the John Smith of Jewish names. So
That's fantastic, man. So we've been going for right about 2.5 hours, man. So I figure we'll hit some fans' questions
Yeah, sure.
and we'll get out of here. So the way I usually do it is just rapid fire, whatever comes to mind. First off, just rattle it off, and we'll go from there.
Great.
J-Ro wants to know, how did the exec see courage at the time? Obviously, you said there was a lot of leeway when we were talking, off the air.
Yeah. Linda Semensky was the head of Cartoon Network at the time, and she's now, I think, head of PBS Kids, which is quite an interest. And you've had her on your show,
National,
and she's wonderful. And she was one of the most unusual executives I've worked for, because she was fearless in that she didn't approach her job out of fear. A lot of executives, understandably, feel that they're not, or will be perceived as not doing their jobs if they don't give you a certain amount of notes or interfere. Not so with Linda. Linda would give us rope with which to hang ourselves or weave the loveliest show. And her attitude is always like, why should I mess with the creative people? Let me keep them as nourished as possible. If there's anything that, is just totally objectionable, we'll say something. But the only substantive, I mean, there were notes from time to time, but my favorite note, which didn't come from Linda on a Courage episode, it came from Standards and Practices, the censors. And we had, I'm trying to think of the episode. It might have been Courage in the Big Stinking City. I'm not sure, but he had to go to a room number, and the room was, what else would I number the room? 666, right? Because it's the devil's mark. And it had nothing to do. It was just like a joke. And they said, you can't do that because, people will be upset by it. People with deep religious convictions. And I said, well, okay. And I'm resigning myself to changing it to, 4B, room 4B or whatever. So jokingly, I said, what if we just made it 666 and a half? And they said, yeah, well, that would be fine. I thought to myself, oh, that's insane. But I didn't say it. I said, oh, okay. And that's what it became. So it's like, nobody's going to, it's like, it doesn't take away the 666. It just made a joke on it. Yeah. It's like, it's 1/2 worse than 666. That note made it a better joke. Mm-hmm. And it was hardly a joke. It was just like a real throwaway. If you saw it kind of moment. And that stands out to me as a note I got from the network means we didn't get a lot of heavy notes. I got, it was John, who I was answering to.
Yeah.
John was giving me, his thoughts. And the network, they had their points of view about certain things in the show, but they were like larger issues, the direction it was going in. So there would be conversations about that. But by and large, it was the most freedom that I've ever experienced the creative team having. As I said, I answered to John and he would give me notes.
Yeah.
But as a team, we had all the room in the world.
That's beautiful, man. Because like I said, I've had her on, and everybody that has ever worked with her has always said the same thing. Like that, I truly mean. There's a few people that I've had on here where I've just thought, man, you are a 1 in a million, 1 in a billion, 1 in a trillion, whatever you want to put it. There's just nobody out there like you, and I'm so glad you exist. And she's for sure one of those people. She's probably at the top of the list.
Without her, Courage would not have been Courage because of her lack of interference.
I mean, if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have Powerpuff Girls with Craig McCracken. And think about that. If we don't get Powerpuff Girls, that means we don't get Foster's Home for Imaginary Kids. We don't get Wander Over Yonder. We don't get Kid Cosmic on Netflix. Then you go and think about what she did with Gendy when he was in Dexter's Lab, and then he went and created Samurai Jack, and then he went and created Prime. Like all of these things and all of these shows that were so hot and heavy at Cartoon Network at that time, she has her thumbprint on because she, like you said, she gave you guys enough rope to either make this beautiful tapestry with or hang yourselves with. And I'm so glad that you guys made these beautiful tapestries with, because like I said, this was just a renaissance of cartoons. That era of cartoons will never, ever, ever be duplicated again. Mercenary Gumbo wants to know, who was your favorite villain, Freaky Fred or King Ramses?
Yeah, I actually saw that come up on Twitter. It made me laugh because who is your favorite villain? I can pick one of these two, as he's assuming that those are of those two. Well, interestingly, I wrote Freaky Fred with a friend of mine who I met while working on Seuss, Bill Marsili, and he wrote King Ramses, which, as head writer, I did guide, but so my fingerprints were on that too. But it was very much him. He's a wonderful writer.
Yeah.
And I think he just sold a series to Netflix, or at least a pilot. Anyway, I do have an affection for Fred because it's in verse. I mean, I remember walking with John Dilworth through the village, Greenwich Village, and he said, I want to do an episode about a freaky barber. And, it was evocative of Sweeney Todd, certainly.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he brought up Sweeney Todd at the time, but he said, I'd like to do it in verse. Mm-hmm. And he knew I love to write in verse. And because of that, it gave the character a whole different flavor and a different challenge into writing, because it was rhyming and metered narration. And Paul Scheffler, who voiced Fred, did such a wonderful job. And I remember feeling the word naughty. I just finding that rhythm, and that's when I felt naughty.
Yeah.
And I said every verse lands on naughty, and every stanza lands on naughty, and from a writing perspective, that stands out. Ramses as a character, I mean, there's so much about that episode that's wonderful, but as a very specific character, Fred has more dimension to me. And I also do have a fondness for Schwick, the cockroach from Courage in the Big Stinking City, which was so much fun to write. It was so bizarre. And I remember coming up with naming him after the neighborhood in Brooklyn, Bushwick. Don't call me Bushwick, call me Schwick. And then to hear that speech recited back to me, as I mentioned earlier, at this random fan I met at Comic-Con, I knew that character was really solid, mm-hmm. because he did it and it was alive. It was living for me right there in front of me. He was inhabiting that character. It's hard to pick your favorite because they're all those villains are John's and my children, mm-hmm. and the other people who worked on the show and wrote those episodes, and it's hard to pick your favorite, but Little Muriel is also one of my favorite villains, because that episode just, Little Muriel became the evil force that Courage had to deal with while he was trying to return her to her natural state. Which is a lot of fun, because sometimes villainy, comes out of different places. You don't always have to have a visiting character. You just do something to an existing character, and it's even more upsetting. One of the most upsetting things I remember as a child was hearing my parents talk in their sleep, my mother particularly, and it scared the shit out of me, because they were like saying things that were incoherent and incomprehensible. And even when you're sleeping, Mom and Dad, you gotta make sense. So part of that feeling went into courage for that episode, because you asked me before about experiences with my kid. I harken back to my childhood, you know, dealing with parents who you thought were compromised at that moment somehow, and and your whole world was crumbling. It's like, what do you do if your parent goes crazy? And people have had to deal with that, and apparently the show helped them. So whatever fucked upness there was in my childhood found its way into my work and helped other people with the fucked upness in their childhood. And so you pay it forward. I hope that they're helping people with the fucked upness in the childhoods they're having now. And God knows there's got to be a lot of that going around.
Yeah,
We can have a whole nother conversation about your conversations with, I know, your older child and but your feelings about having children in the world in which we live, and you served, and so your experiences are far different from mine. But I do think often about, will my kids have kids? They don't, they're not sure that they want to bring kids into the world,
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of courage, and I really respect that. You've seen things that I never have seen or never will see. Had experiences that I can only imagine and can barely imagine. And you come home from that, and children, and it's got to turn your head around 180 degrees, to go from that to that. That I should start a podcast and just interview you every week.
Oh, I mean,
it should be the Julian Hester Tester show. Every week we'll give you a test.
if you want to, it'll get dark. I mean, it's definitely weird because when my and one thing I'm gonna get so much shit for this story just because the fans like, man, shut up about the military. It's so boring. I get that comment almost every single time I bring it up. But like I said, this is my fucking show, so we're gonna do just whatever. If I feel like talking about why the sky should be colored green, we're gonna talk about why it should be colored green. But here we are. We're talking about the military. And one thing that I never thought I would really have was I never thought I'd have kids to begin with. I was never really, I don't want to say into kids, but I was never really, like, man, I want to be a dad, because I didn't have a dad in the picture. Mine ruined his life on pills, alcohol, chasing women, went to prison when I was real young. So,
oh, geez.
I didn't have a male role model in my life for the longest time.
Yeah, my dad wasn't much of a role model either, but it wasn't as bleak as what you're describing.
I mean, it's like he never beat us, he never molested us, he didn't want kids, is essentially what we were getting at. He didn't want to be a dad. The first sign of any kind of adversity, he tucked his tail. Like, pressure does two things. Pressure either busts pipes or pressure creates diamonds, and his pipes just busted. He just didn't want to be there. He thought it was just time to run, essentially. That's the only thing I could really imagine. I've talked to him since, I've tried rekindling that, but it's not there for me. And for me, everything you can pretty much see on my face. If I'm happy, you're going to know I'm happy. If I'm pissed, you're going to know I'm pissed. I have a very poor poker face is what I'm getting at. And when I brought, or I didn't bring it in, my wife brought in our first son, and I brought in our second son too. When she brought in my oldest son into the world, and then I'm looking at him like, man, this is crazy. Like, one, I didn't even know how to hold a baby. So I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Please don't.
Nobody knows how to hold, unless you were like an older sibling with little babies around. You don't know how to hold a baby till you hold a baby.
Yeah, and it was just the weirdest experience. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is fucking wild. And then you get the news that you're getting ready to deploy. And you can be gone for 6 months, you can be gone for 9 months, you can be gone for a year. Luckily, I was only gone for about 6.5, 7 months, I think.
And you and your wife had just had the child. I forgot. I think you mentioned that to me.
Yeah, we had just had our first son, and then I'm getting ready to deploy. So when he had his 2-month old, day, or whatever you would call it, when he hit 2 months, I was pretty much gone, and I didn't come back until right before Christmas. So I got to see his first Christmas, but I missed first words. I missed first steps. I missed first almost everything with the exception of Christmas. Um, you know, I got very lucky because a lot of my friends missed their child's birth. A lot of my friends missed their first birthdays. A lot of my friends aren't here anymore because they passed. You know? So I got very lucky in the grand scheme of things, but I got something taken away from me, and I signed up for. I knew what I was getting myself into. In 2008, when I was looking, for jobs, the housing market crashed. There was no fucking jobs for a young guy. I didn't want to go to college because I barely passed high school. I didn't think that getting 30, 40, $50,000 in debt right off the bat would do me any good. Right, it would just make me in whatever position just that much hungrier and that much more. I don't want to say at odds in, but it would definitely make things a lot harder. I just didn't want to get saddled down with debt. So, and I never thought I'd join the military. So I was like, no, let's just fucking join the military. And I was like, I'll just do for 4 years and that's it. I ended up doing 7.5.
Wow.
And
thank you.
Thank you. And so I'm doing all of this stuff, and then I just start realizing, like, fuck, man. I mean, my dad wasn't there; he chose not to be there, and I'm not choosing to not be there because I'm being forced to say I have to go someplace. But in the same sense, it's like I want to be there for my kid, right? I didn't have a dad growing up, and I don't want somebody to ever have to go through that because it's something weird. It does something to you. You go to the park, and then you see little Timmy's dad playing catch with them or playing basketball with them or throwing the ball around. You're like, why doesn't my dad want to do that? And that's the last thing I ever wanted. He would ask me questions like, when are you coming home? And I'm like, buddy, I don't know, man. And whenever they tell me I can come home, he's like, well, I want you to come home so we can play. And it fucking crushed me. When he told me that, I was like, I'm done with this. I gotta and then luckily I got out, for the most part unscathed. I got hurt I didn't see war, I didn't see, I had friends die, but they didn't, they died when they came home with all the fucked up shit they had to go through. I was very lucky. I was on a boat. I was away from people. The craziest thing I've ever seen was I saw a car bomb go off when we were in Dubai, I believe. It's in an abandoned parking lot about 100, 200 yards away. It just went boom. Somebody blew it up. That's the craziest shit I ever saw. All right. So I had a lot better than most people. But like I said, I missed a lot of stuff. It's time that I'll never get back. And it's crazy now because like I said, we just had the second kid, and I'm getting to experience everything that I missed with the first one. So I'm getting to be up every couple of hours. I'm getting to, hold him when he's crying. I'm getting to hold him when he's smiling. He's at that stage now where he's starting to mimic everything you do. He's trying to do. So you see his little face moving, and he's trying to do what you do, and he's just laughing. He doesn't even know why he's doing it. He's just fucking happy, man. It's so cool to see this shit because, like I said, I missed it with the first one. I don't even know how we got on this fucking topic, but it's just wild when you think about it. It's just like you see this little person, and this little person eventually they'll get their own personality, and that personality and then they get into stuff, and then they get out of stuff, and then they get into stuff because you like it. And it's just fucking weird. It's just wild and weird, man. Like I said, I never thought, one, that I would be a dad, and two, that I would have this much fun. Like, it's hard as fuck. It is the hardest job I've ever had in my life. No
kidding.
Military was easy compared to this. Anything I've done in my life is easier than being a parent. It's so fucking difficult because whether they get their heart broken, or they get hurt, or they're just going through some shit, it just hits you so much differently, right? You want to be that person that wipes the slate clean. You want to be the eraser. And you can't sometimes, and it just crushes you on a different level, man.
But you're there. I mean, even when you were deployed, I have the sense that your firstborn felt your presence more than you felt your father's presence.
Yeah.
Because even at a distance, you were more tangibly, there, emotionally present, I should say. And it is, if you don't think it's a hard job, you're not doing it right. You have the responsibility for this life, and it's not just somebody who showed up and you have to take care of this. This is you love this child with a kind of love you've never felt before. Maybe you felt it for mom. I'm thinking about my mom too, and but that's like the other side of it. And I often sort of like think about life in terms of the miracle worker, the story of Annie Sullivan, who taught Helen Keller, and Patty Duke played Helen Keller in the movie, in the original movie, and then played Annie Sullivan in the remake. So she played both characters, and I think about life that way, kind of like we're playing the role of the kid there, and now we're playing the role of the parent. But it is a solemn and profound responsibility, joy, and you do feel the sadness of the child, but you have to. But it's okay just to be there.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay that you can't, wipe that slate totally clean. And that's an important lesson for a child to learn. It's interesting. Let me say something that's right on target for that, but totally a tangent for the other parts of the conversation. Paul Simon, one of my favorite songwriters, wrote a lullaby, a bedtime song for, I guess, Harper, his first son, in the 70s, called St. Judy's Comet. And it's just, it's a whimsical song, and it's lilting and it's lovely, and it's just, helping your kid fall asleep. It's kind of a slightly lively lullaby.
Yeah.
Years later, and it does figure in because it was in the Wild Thornberrys movie. So it's animated. He wrote a song called Father and Daughter, and there's a line in it that struck me, very different from the first song to Harper's first song, and the line is, "While I can't promise you there's no monster hiding underneath your bed." I'm going to start to cry. Well, I can't promise you there's no monster hiding underneath your bed. I will stand guard like a postcard of a golden retriever.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, that's just a different perspective.
Yes.
On life, and you don't know that the first time around. You want to wipe that slate clean, but you know what? You can't in this world. And my older son saw the first plane hit the first tower out of his schoolroom window.
Yeah.
He was looking at our building and the towers beyond. That's the view from here in Brooklyn Heights. He loved looking at, because we live in a big apartment building, and there were the towers in Lower Manhattan. And he was just looking out the window and just loving the view. And he happened to see the first plane hit without any context whatsoever.
It's insane.
And I wish I could just pull that experience out of him, but it's part of who he is.
Yeah.
And he's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And when we went to school to pick him up that terrible day, I was awakened by my younger child, who told me what was going on, because I was sleeping. I was probably up late working the night before. And we went to school to see what, where Julian was. And they had all gone to the basement of the school. And Julian was going around to his friend saying, "How you doing? You okay? How you feeling?" Mr. Rogers always said, in a tragic circumstance like that, look at the helpers.
Yes. Look at who's running towards the storm.
Right. And just look at the people helping other people, with compassion. And there was this, what was he, 11-year-old kid just showing pure compassion. What he just suffered something that, you know what it's like to see it, a car blow up when you don't expect it. Plane hit a building. It's what do you say to your kids? How do you explain that? And then you see them functioning in a way that teaches you something, not just about them, but about how to behave.
That day was the first day I remember being scared of something that was real. You know what
Okay,
I mean?
I'm just sorry.
Oh no, you're perfectly fine, man.
I feel okay.
I've
If
had a,
anybody's still watching, it's okay that they're seeing me cry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, it's perfectly fine, man. You ain't gotta apologize. I've had a couple people break down on here. Townsend Coleman was one. I wasn't expecting that when I really hit him with a question. Just about how he looked at his life and his career and everything like that when he was done and hanging it up. What would he put down? It really touched him. It really got to him. So, man, if the tears got to come, the tears got to come. It's a normal function, man. It's like shitting. It's like eating. It's like sleeping. It's a normal function, but
Yep. Well, it's I cry. This is one of the reasons that Julian had issues with me was that I cried a lot. I'm an emotional person. I have what and it's like, and my wife doesn't cry as much as I do. She rarely cries. She's very emotional and she's a loving, terrific person. But I'm just a veil of just a river of tears, in joy and in sadness. My emotions, like you said, your face,
you'll say it all.
yeah. It's there. So yeah, I feel you. I feel what you're saying about your children and the experience of being a father when you didn't have one who taught you how to be a father. I go back to my dream about the Dick Van Dyke Show, and I wanted Rob Petrie to be my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Did you? I'm curious. Growing up as you did you pick out TV dads who you wanted to be your dads, and did you sort of in your youth glom? I remember, looking back, you could almost say, oh, they were like boy crushes, but I always glommed on to older guys who were like young father figures to me.
My guy, I brought him up a little bit before we started talking about Theo White, but James Uncle Phil in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That was somebody I looked up to, and I never got to meet, and I never got to talk to, which is tragic in its own way because it was just There's a scene in did you ever watch The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with Will Smith?
I watched it. I didn't watch it religiously.
Okay, there was an episode in there where it hit home, and then it was Will Smith's dad had left. I just drew a lot of the same similarities. So Will Smith's dad had left real young in the show. Before he was a kid, he just stepped out on his mom. He didn't even know who his dad was. And it wasn't until he was living with his rich uncle in Bel Air and he was doing good and he was a captain of the basketball team and all this good shit was happening to him that he came into his life. And then the same kind of things when my dad would come in and out of my life or try to be a part of my life, but didn't really want to be a part of my life. He would come in and out, in and out, in and out. And then you would see and it was just a 30-minute episode. You would see Will Smith's whole demeanor changed, right? He started, wanting to be around his dad more than he wanted to be around Uncle Phil. But Uncle Phil was giving him the game. Uncle Phil was giving him the answers to the test. Uncle Phil was teaching him how to be a man, and he was trying to warn Will about the pitfalls that his father. His father was leading him down this road where he was filling his head full of this just bullshit. Essentially, he was telling him, "Oh, he's going to be a better dad. He's going to be this," and he's like, "No, he's not. He's going to let you down. I don't want you to get hurt." Yeah. And then I see this, and then eventually, what Uncle Phil was saying was going to happen happens. He didn't show up, and then he hits this line, and he goes, "Why doesn't my dad want me?" And whenever I see that scene alone, that scene makes me fucking cry every single time. Like if anybody just would watch that one episode of that show, everybody would be a fan of this show forever. That show packed so much emotion, so much real life shit, so much shit I connected with just on a personal level because I could feel for that character wanting to have a dad, like my mom showed me how to shave, right? My 3 Billy Goat hairs that I had when I was 16. My mom showed me how to shave. My mom told me how to talk to girls. My mom told me everything that a man is supposed to teach me, right? And yeah,
I understand.
Phil, I looked at Uncle Phil and I was like, when I become a dad, if I ever become a dad, that's what I want to be. I want to be somebody that no matter what they can go to and they know I'm going to be pissed if they do something stupid, like all people would be, like all dads would be. You're probably going to be upset if your kids do something extremely fucking stupid. But at the end of the day, we did shit. We were extremely stupid. It just happens. It's what life is. But I want to make sure that I'm there where I can give them, like I said, the answers to the test. I want them to be just as prepared or more prepared than I was to be a man. Because once you become a man, there's a few things that'll happen. And at least for me, you got to be able to talk to people. You got to be able to treat a woman right. You got to be able to do, like, a man has three jobs. You got to protect, you got to provide, and you got to love. Right? Those three things right there. And those aren't my words. I didn't come up with that. Actually, Shaq came up with that. Basketball player Shaquille O'Neal. I heard that. And I'm like, dude, that is fucking spot on. You got to provide, you got to protect, and you got to love, man. And it's just, ever since I heard that, it just changed my perception. And like I said, I fuck up all the time being a dad. I probably should listen or I probably should have yelled when I should have listened. I should have listened when I should have yelled. I should have did this. I should have did that. But that's the whole perspective thing. It seems like that's the word of the day, is perspective. It's like, it's hindsight is 2020. You learn after the fact, like, shit, I should have been a little bit more accepting in there. I should have been a little bit more patient, or I should have done X, Y, and Z. But that's the best part about being a dad. That's the best part about being a person. As long as you don't fuck up to a certain extent, or you don't do something where you can't come back from, you always get a second chance to, next time I'm in this situation, I'm going to do this and it'll be so much better. You get to grow as a person, grow as a parent. And that's what's so fucking great about this shit, man. You get so many opportunities to make sure that what you're doing for your kid and for your wife and for yourself is the right thing. And that like I said, it's a whole bunch of word vomit that I just threw out again, but it's like, it's becoming, like I said, becoming a dad, becoming a parent, becoming somebody that somebody else is looking up to you for advice, somebody that can't protect themselves 100% yet, no matter how much karate this little bastard does, kicking around, running up, jumping, kicking me, punching me in the stomach, no matter how much of that stuff he does. My job is to make sure that I'm providing, I'm protecting, and I'm loving. And I feel like I'm doing that. So I feel like I'm winning.
Well, you are, and let me send you a message from your future self, because I'll play future Julian here. Your kids, what you do, and God knows I spend plenty of time flagellating myself for not being a better father, and for not. There's a very now it's hard to really describe. There's a fluidity to gender now that is can be confusing, but liberating. And as with you, my mother was the prominent parent figure. She was mom and dad.
Yeah.
She taught me most of those things that you described, and in other ways. So I felt kind of like a mother, and I'm an artist. And I'm just like, I didn't feel like the other dads.
Yeah.
And I always thought, this is, I should be more, I don't know what, stoic. I should cry less. I should be less emotional. I should, I should know exactly what to do, as if I had written the script beforehand. But what I know now, and what you will know when your kids are grown, you'll see that most of what you've given them is not what you taught them overtly, or how you rewarded or punished them, or it's who you are.
Yeah.
Kids are remarkable at their ability to absorb you in ways that you don't realize at the time. And both of our kids have told us that we did a really good job raising them. That's nothing we would have known when Julian was a teenager, or going through whatever emotional Sturm und Drang visits any family and anybody growing up.
Yeah.
But I look at them now, and they're remarkable human beings, and they're loving, and they care about people. And as I mentioned about Julian on that 9/11 tragic day, but one that showed me something of who he was, absolutely, with or without that experience. That's who he was. Maybe it brought it out of him more, but who, how you live your life and how you treat the people around you and the love you show I think is more important than the calculations you make along the way. Am I being the proper father?
Yeah.
Am I providing? Am I protecting? You're caring, and there were times in my career when my wife was providing more than I was.
Yeah.
She's a lawyer. She's still working. uh and I was, I wasn't deployed, but I was working a lot.
Yeah.
uh, uh you know I wasn't home a lot. Not comparing it to you, except to say that
Oh
it,
no, I 100% get you. Yeah.
but she was definitely the primary caretaker.
Mhm.
And I was working crazy hours, and then I'd show up, and it'd be like the Danny Thomas show, Make Room for Daddy, which preceded even my birth. That's how old it is. It comes from something that was in his life, is that he'd be on the road as a comic and as a performer, and every time he came home, they'd have to make room for Daddy.
Yeah.
And that's where the title of the show came from. And that's where the song that I mentioned earlier, I Can't Come Home Until I Go,
Mhm.
I was inspired to write. I thought to myself, okay, it's Clifford the Big Red Dog. You'll dig this. The movie Clifford's Really Big Adventure, Clifford's Really Big Movie, or whatever it was called. Uh, it didn't really have. He was running away. Clifford was running away because he thought he was eating his family out of house and home because he heard something the dad said.
Yeah.
So, but he wasn't really running away. He was going to join a talent show to win a lifetime supply of dog food, and he was going to come home either way. So there was no real tension there. It was just like implied, and we had to write this pivotal song, Jody and I, that like defined that. And I thought, okay, he's going away, but he's coming back. Well, that's kind of like when we moved back to New York, and I was never more popular professionally in Hollywood than after I moved back to New York. I never knew how to play hard to get, but apparently it works. So I moved back to New York, and I would be traveling back to LA. Sometimes we would land in at JFK, and I get a call from the guy I just had a meeting with, said, "You got to come right back because we're going to do this thing." And it was like I'd go home, I'd repack my bag, and I'd leave. And if I had, and my kids would, be sad. Particularly Julian was more sentient at the time than Gabe, who was born the year after we returned to New York. And he was so sad. I would leave, and nobody makes me laugh the way you do, Dad. And I thought to myself, wow, if I had a writer working for me, writing my lines, then instead of just being inside a person, feeling bad for your kid, what would he say? What would this character who's me say? And I thought, I can't come home until I go, and you love me coming home. And that's what that whole song was. It was just, the tension between feeling a temporary loss
Mhm.
and then feeling the security and warmth of the return, and how beautiful that is.
Yes.
So that it was profound, and I think that resonated to the people who took that song into their hearts and used it for their autistic children or their brain damaged grandpa, uh, it was very comforting. It was a very comforting song. I'll send it to you. You'll appreciate it. I defy you not to tear up a little bit, especially given this conversation. Um, but are there more fan questions? I think we've
There
this
is,
is
but we hit almost all of them really, and this is by far the longest podcast I've done too. This. I don't know if you've looked at the time, man, but we did 3 hours.
yeah. And I just noticed that it's tomorrow.
It is, man. So, and I don't think any fan's question could really top the last 15, 20 minutes of the conversation we just had. Because, like I said, I never know where these podcasts are going to go. I never know what to expect. I never know what's going to happen, other than the few talking points I might have and the few fans' questions that we might have. Other than that, man, it's free game. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on here, man. I know you could have been doing anything in the world other than talking to me, and I really appreciated you talking to me about the stuff that you did, and then getting to hear some stories that I probably never would have heard, because if I Google your name, I'm not going to hear the Sigourney Weaver story. I'm not going to hear the Andy White story. I'm not going to hear all of these stories that we just heard. And a lot of the fans aren't going to hear this shit. And I think this
Well,
fans really enjoy.
you're gonna have me back for my Sinatra story, my Charlton Heston story, my three Mel Brooks stories, or read the book that I haven't written yet. I just want to say one thing in tribute to both our mothers.
Okay.
When my mother passed away, and I was going through, she was like an archivist. She kept everything I ever did, and every piece of paper. I mean, it's just meticulous, but it was like densely packed stuff. And I found a box of scripts
Mhm.
of mine that I had given her, and it was a Courage the Cowardly Dog script. I forget which episode. And what I had noticed, my mother went through the script and wrote things down in the margins, and
That's awesome.
like the best notes you can imagine. But I picked up the Courage script, and her lip prints, she kissed it with lipstick on. It was on and I still have that, uh, because that's better. That is better than anything,
Yeah.
And she's definitely in everything that I do. So I dedicate this podcast to our mothers.
Beautiful, man. Well, I really appreciate that. Where can the fans go and find you if they want to see what David's up to?
Well, usually I'm under a desk, kind of curled up in a fetal position, if they want to look there, trying to think of what to do next. Um, at Facebook, I'm, David Steven Cohen.
Not X
On
Cohen, David S. Cohen, not David X. Cohen.
Yeah, yes, not David Steven Cohen. Although I was thinking of putting two lines through the S and making my middle initial a $sign.
Ooh.
But I never did that. So, and at Cohen DS, last name, then the first and middle initial, on Twitter, and Instagram is D Stephen Cohen, I think.
Yes.
I started going with D Stephen Cohen for a while. I was toying with the idea of being D Stephen Cohen as a writer, but I was already David Cohen. Let me just use all the names, and see if that works out. So yeah. And as I told you, I have a website, but it's really rusty and dusty. So I don't want to send anybody there until I dust it off. But it's pretty easy to find that, if anybody wants to endeavor. I just don't want to promote it so directly. And I have a few songs up on SoundCloud. I really should do a better job of keeping my professional presence online. But I so enjoy putting things on Facebook for my community of friends, many of whom are from my professional life, people who I actually know, and people who I never knew but knew their work or worked down, the next building on the Paramount lot from me. Uh, so I love just putting creative stuff. A lot of photography. I love photography. I put a lot of that on Facebook and Instagram. And as evil as Facebook can be, you know, uh, and as much trouble as it can cause, in my little corner of it, I get a tremendous amount of satisfaction from my peers, my
Mhm.
professional peers, as well as fans and new friends and people I went to high school with,
Yeah.
and all of that. It's really an interesting. I wish if I could make money with Facebook posts, I'd be so happy. So so instead, just follow me, and I'll try to do even more stuff. So
Beautiful. Well, like I said, man, I really appreciate everything you've done, man, because you hit on it a little bit ago, just with the fans. You never know what somebody's going through, and I didn't have any horrible stuff going on when I was watching Courage, but I knew as soon as I turned on that little pink dog that was always scared, that was always running away, that was always getting yelled at by Eustace or always getting loved at by Muriel, I knew I was going to have one thing: a good fucking